there, dear listeners. Welcome back to our podcast, powered by the wonderful world of Jet Off. AI, where every day feels like a holiday.
That's right. And we're so glad you're here with us today. I must say, Mira, you're looking particularly radiant today. What's the secret to your glow?
Oh, Leah. It's just a pinch of morning coffee and a dash of excitement for today's topic. Speaking of which, let's dive right in. Last week, we were discussing the wonders of Japan, and I was sharing my hilarious encounter with a mischievous sumo wrestler.
Yes, I remember that one. You managed to sneak onto the stage and photobomb the entire ceremony. And the wrestler didn't challenge you to a match.
Well, I think he was too busy trying to contain his belly laughter. Anyway, moving on to today's topic. We have an exciting comparison for you, Lithuania and the Netherlands.
That's right. Two beautiful countries with unique cultures and histories. I'm sure our listeners are eager to learn more about these fascinating nations.
Absolutely. And we're here to guide you through the differences and similarities between Lithuania and the Netherlands. Whether you're planning a trip, of moving, or even considering marrying someone from one of these countries, we've got you covered. Our podcast will be your comprehensive guide to help you make informed decisions.
That's right. And don't worry, we'll be sharing our personal experiences and insights, along with some fun facts and anecdotes to keep you entertained.
So, let's get started. As we always say, knowledge is power, and laughter is the best medicine. And with today's podcast, we're prescribing a healthy dose of both.
Well, I think we're off to a great start. Let's dive into the wonderful world of Lithuania and the Netherlands.
And remember, dear listeners, if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to discuss, feel free to leave a comment or reach out to us on social media. We love hearing from you and engaging in conversations that spark new ideas and insights.
That's right. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell, so you never miss an episode. We're to share our adventures and knowledge with you.
Alright, let's get started on our journey through Lithuania and the Netherlands. Buckle up, everyone, and get ready for a fun-filled ride. Lithuania's capital, Vilnius, is often considered one of the safest cities in Europe, with low crime rates compared to other major cities.
That's great to hear. But let's not get too comfortable. We still need to discuss the darker side of crime in Lithuania.
Oh, come on. Leo? Lithuania is a wonderful country with a rich history and culture. You're not going to scare our listeners, are you?
Scare them? I'm just keeping it real. After all, safety is a concern for anyone moving to or traveling through a new country.
Fair enough. But I think Lithuania's low crime rate is due in part to its strong social cohesion and community spirit.
I agree. But what about the rise of cybercrime in Lithuania? That's a growing concern for many people.
Yes, cybercrime is a problem everywhere. But Lithuania has made significant strides in combating it. In fact, the country has implemented strict laws and regulations to protect its citizens from online threats.
That's true. But what about the human trafficking and organized crime that still exists in Lithuania? Those are serious issues that need to be addressed.
Absolutely. And I'm not downplaying those problems. Lithuania has been working hard to combat these issues, and there are many organizations and initiatives in place to support victims and prevent further crime.
I see what you're saying, but I think our listeners would be interested in knowing more about the specific measures Lithuania has taken to tackle these issues.
Well, for example, the Lithuanian government has established a special task force to investigate and prosecute human trafficking cases. And there are also many non-governmental organizations working to support victims and prevent trafficking.
That's great to hear. But what about the Netherlands? How does it compare to Lithuania in terms of general safety and crime rates?
The Netherlands. A country known for its tolerant and open society, but also for its relatively high crime rates compared to some other European countries.
That's right. And one of the main concerns in the Netherlands is the rise of pickpocketing and theft in tourist areas.
Yes, that's true. But the Netherlands has also taken steps to combat these issues, such as increasing police presence in tourist areas and implementing stricter laws against pickpocketing.
I see what you're saying. But I think it's also worth noting that the Netherlands has a relatively high rate of reported crimes, including violent crimes like assault and robbery.
Yes, that's true. But it's also worth noting that the Netherlands has a strong focus on community policing and restorative justice, which can help to reduce crime rates and improve safety.
I agree. And I think our listeners would be interested in knowing more about the specific measures the Netherlands has taken to tackle these issues.
Well, for example, the Dutch government has implemented a number of initiatives to reduce crime and improve safety, including programs to support at-risk youth and provide job training for former offenders.
That's great to hear. But what about the cultural factors that shape crime rates in both Lithuania and the Netherlands? How do these countries' cultural norms and values influence their approach to crime and safety?
That's a great question. Leo, I think both countries have a strong emphasis on community and social cohesion, which can help to reduce crime rates and improve safety.
That's true. But I think it's also worth noting that the Netherlands has a relatively high rate of reported crimes related to substance abuse and addiction.
Yes, that's true. But the Netherlands has also implemented a number of initiatives to address these issues, such as providing access to addiction treatment and support services.
I see what you're saying. But I think it's also worth noting that Lithuania has a relatively low rate of reported crimes related to substance abuse and addiction.
Yes, that's true. But I think it's also worth noting that Lithuania has a strong focus on prevention and education, which can help to reduce crime rates and improve safety.
I agree. And I think our listeners would be interested in knowing more about the specific measures both countries have taken to tackle these issues.
Well, for example, Lithuania has implemented a number of programs to support at-risk youth and provide job training for former offenders, which can help to reduce crime rates and improve safety.
That's great to hear. But what about the role of technology in combating crime in both Lithuania and the Netherlands? How are these countries using technology to improve safety and reduce crime rates?
That's a great question, Leo. I think both countries are making significant strides in using technology to combat crime, such as implementing surveillance systems and using data analytics to identify and prevent crimes.
That's true. But I think it's also worth noting that the Netherlands has a relatively high rate of reported crimes related to cybercrime and online harassment.
Yes, that's true. But the Netherlands has also implemented a number of initiatives to address these issues, such as providing support services for victims of online harassment.
I see what you're saying. But I think it's also worth noting that Lithuania has a relatively low rate of reported crimes related to cybercrime and online harassment.
Yes, that's true. But I think it's also worth noting that Lithuania has a strong focus on education and prevention, which can help to reduce crime rates and improve safety.
I agree. And I think our listeners would be interested in knowing more about the specific measures both countries have taken to tackle these issues.
Well, for example, Lithuania has implemented a number of programs to support at-risk youth and provide job training for former offenders, which can help to reduce crime rates and improve safety.
That's great to hear. But what about the role of community policing in both Lithuania and the Netherlands? How are these countries using community policing to improve safety and reduce crime rates?
That's a great question, Leo. I think both countries are making significant strides in using community policing to improve safety and reduce crime rates, such as implementing programs to support at-risk youth and provide job training for former offenders.
That's true. But I think it's also worth noting that the Netherlands has a relatively high rate of reported crimes related to substance abuse and addiction.
Yes, that's true. But the Netherlands has also implemented a number of initiatives to address these issues, such as providing access to addiction treatment and support services.
I see what you're saying. But I think it's also worth noting that Lithuania has a relatively low rate of reported crimes related to substance abuse and addiction.
Yes, that's true. But I think it's also worth noting that Lithuania has a strong focus on prevention and education, which can help to reduce crime rates and improve safety.
I agree. And I think our listeners would be interested in knowing more about the specific measures both countries have taken to tackle these issues.
Well, for example, Lithuania has implemented a. Lithuania's political system is based on a parliamentary democracy, with a president serving as state and a prime minister as head of government. It's fascinating to see how the country balances its independence with its EU membership.
That's right. Mira, and I'm curious. Have you heard about Lithuania's unique approach to social harmony? They have a strong emphasis on community development and local initiatives.
Actually, yes. I've been reading about how Lithuania's communities are working together to create a more cohesive society. It's really inspiring to see how they're addressing issues like poverty and inequality.
I completely agree. And I think it's worth noting that Lithuania has a strong tradition of civic engagement and volunteering. It's not uncommon to see people from all walks of life coming together to make a difference.
Exactly. And I think that's something that our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with. I mean, who wouldn't want to live in a society where people are working together for the greater good?
Well, I think it's worth mentioning that Lithuania's social harmony is also reflected in its vibrant cultural scene. From folk music to contemporary art, there's a thriving creative community that brings people together.
That's so true. And I've heard that the Netherlands is also known for its cultural diversity and community spirit. I'm curious, have you noticed any similarities between the two countries?
Yes. I think one of the key similarities is the emphasis on community development and social cohesion. The Netherlands, like Lithuania, has a strong focus on creating inclusive and equitable societies.
I love that. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a strong tradition of social welfare and support for vulnerable populations. It's really heartwarming to see how they're looking out for each other.
Well, I think it's worth mentioning that the Netherlands has a unique approach to social welfare, with a strong emphasis on decentralized decision-making and local autonomy.
That's so true. And I think it's worth noting that Lithuania has a similar approach, with a focus on empowering local communities and giving them the resources they need to thrive.
I completely agree. And I think it's worth mentioning that both countries have a strong tradition of tolerance and acceptance. It's really inspiring to see how they're creating inclusive societies that welcome people from all backgrounds.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Leo. And I think it's worth noting that our listeners would likely agree with us on this. After all, who wouldn't want to live in a society that values diversity and inclusion?
Well, I think it's worth mentioning that the Netherlands has a unique approach to social harmony, with a focus on polar model decision-making, where stakeholders come together to find common ground.
Oh, I've heard of that. And I think it's really to see how the Netherlands is using this approach to create a more cohesive society.
Well, I think it's worth noting that Lithuania has a similar approach, with a focus on building trust and consensus among stakeholders.
That's so true. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a strong tradition of civic engagement and volunteering. It's really inspiring to see how they're creating a more active and participatory citizenry.
I completely agree. And I think it's worth mentioning that the Netherlands has a unique approach to social harmony, with a focus on pillarization where different communities come together to create a more cohesive society.
Oh, I've heard of that. And I think it's really fascinating to see how the Netherlands is using this approach to create a more inclusive society.
Well, I think it's worth noting that Lithuania has a similar approach, with a focus on building bridges between different communities.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Leo. And I think it's worth noting that our listeners would likely agree with us on this. After all, who wouldn't want to live in a society that values diversity and inclusion?
Well, I think it's worth mentioning that the Netherlands has a unique approach to social harmony, with a focus on creating safely inclusive communities where everyone feels welcome and included.
Oh, I've heard of that. And I think it's really fascinating to see how the Netherlands is using this approach to create a more cohesive society. And for our listeners, I'd like to ask, what do you think is the key to creating a more harmonious society? Do you have any experiences or insights to share?
Well, I think it's worth noting that Lithuania has a unique approach to social harmony, with a focus on building trust and consensus among stakeholders. For more insights like this, don't forget to check out Jetoff. They have a wealth of information on social harmony and community development.
Dive into the economic conditions and cost of living in Lithuania and the Netherlands. I'm curious. Leo, what do you think are some of the key differences between these two countries in terms of economic stability?
Well, Mira, I think one of the main differences is the job market. Lithuania has been experiencing a steady growth in its economy, with a low unemployment rate and a strong focus on industries like IT and manufacturing. In contrast, the Netherlands has a more diversified economy, with a strong focus on services, trade, and finance.
That's an interesting point. Leo, I was that Lithuania's economy is also heavily reliant on the EU's support, whereas the Netherlands has a more independent economy. How do you think this affects the cost of living in each country?
Great question. Mira, the Netherlands has a relatively high cost of living, especially in cities like Amsterdam, where rent and housing prices are sky high. Lithuania, on the other hand, has a lower cost of living, making it a more attractive option for expats and digital nomads.
I completely agree. Leo, and speaking of digital nomads, I've heard that Lithuania is becoming a popular destination for remote workers, thanks to its affordable cost of living and favorable tax environment. What do you think are some of the key benefits of living in Lithuania for remote workers?
Well, Mira, one of the biggest benefits is the low cost of living, which allows remote workers to stretch their budget further. Additionally, Lithuania has a well-developed IT infrastructure, making it easy to stay connected and productive while working remotely.
That's a great point. Leo, I'm sure our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with me that the country has a lot to offer in terms of affordability and infrastructure. Now, let's talk about the Netherlands. I've heard that the country has a reputation for being one of the most expensive countries in Europe. What do you think are some of the reasons behind this high cost of living?
Great question. Mira, one of the main reasons is the high taxes in the Netherlands, which can be as high as 50% in some cases. Additionally, the country has a high cost of housing, especially in cities like Amsterdam, where rent prices are astronomical.
Well, that's a steep tax rate. I'm curious. Leo, how do you think expats can navigate the tax system in the Netherlands? Is it really as complicated as everyone makes it out to be?
Well, Mira, I think it's safe to say that the tax system in the Netherlands can be a bit overwhelming, even for expats who are familiar with the system. However, with the right guidance and support, it's definitely possible to navigate the system and minimize your tax liability.
I see. And speaking of guidance and support, I've heard that the Netherlands has a well-developed expat community, with many resources available for expats who are new to the country. What do you think are some of the key benefits of living in the Netherlands for expats?
Well, Mira, one of the biggest benefits is the country's strong sense of community, which makes it easy to connect with other expats and locals alike. Additionally, the Netherlands has a well-developed infrastructure, making it easy to get around and access essential services.
That's a great point. Leo, I'm sure our listeners living in the Netherlands would agree with me that the country has a lot to offer in terms of community and infrastructure. Now, let's talk about some of the practical aspects of living in each country. What do you think are some of the key differences between Lithuania and the Netherlands in terms of healthcare and education?
Great question. Mira, both countries have a well-developed healthcare system, but the Netherlands has a more comprehensive system, with a wider range of medical services and facilities available. In terms of education, Lithuania has a strong focus on education, with a high literacy rate and a well-developed education system.
That's an interesting point. Leo, I was that the Netherlands has a more decentralized education system, with a greater emphasis on local control and autonomy. How do you think this affects the quality of education in each country?
Well, Mira, I think the decentralized system in the Netherlands allows for a greater degree of flexibility and innovation in education, which can lead to better outcomes for students. However, it also means that there can be more variability in the quality of education from one region to another.
I see. And speaking of flexibility and innovation, I've heard that the Netherlands has a strong focus on lifelong learning and professional development. What do you think are some of the key benefits of living in the Netherlands for people who value lifelong learning?
Well, Mira, one of the biggest benefits is the country's strong focus on innovation and entrepreneurship, which provides many opportunities for professional development and growth. Additionally, the Netherlands has a well-developed network of universities and research institutions, making it easy to access high-quality education and training.
That's a great point. Leo, I'm sure our listeners living in the Netherlands would agree with me that the country has a lot to offer in terms of lifelong learning and professional development. Now, let's talk about some of the challenges of living in each country. What do you think are some of the key challenges that expats may face when living in Lithuania or the Netherlands?
Great question. Yeah, one of the biggest challenges is likely to be the language barrier, especially for expats who don't speak Lithuanian or Dutch. Additionally, both countries have a high cost of living, which can make it difficult for expats to adjust to the local cost of living.
That's a great point. I was that the Netherlands has a more complex bureaucracy, with many regulations and procedures that can be difficult to navigate. How do you think expats can prepare for the challenges of living in the Netherlands?
Well, Mira, I think it's essential for expats to research the country thoroughly before making the move, and to seek guidance and support from local experts and expat communities. Additionally, it's a good idea to learn some basic Dutch language skills, as this will make it easier to navigate the local bureaucracy and access essential services.
I see. And speaking of language skills, I've heard that Lithuania has a more relaxed attitude towards language, with many people speaking English as a second language. What do you think are some of the key benefits of living in Lithuania for people who don't speak Lithuanian?
Well, Mira, one of the biggest benefits is the country's welcoming attitude towards expats and foreigners, which makes it easy to connect with locals and access essential services. Additionally, many Lithuanians speak English, especially in the service industry, which makes it easier for expats to navigate the country.
That's a great point. I'm sure our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with me that the country has a lot to offer in terms of language. Dive into accommodation options and quality in Lithuania and the Netherlands. I'm sure our listeners living in these countries would agree with me that finding the right place to live is a top priority.
Absolutely. Mira, from my research, I found that Lithuania has a relatively affordable housing market, especially in smaller towns and cities. You can find a one-bedroom apartment in Vilnius for around $400–500 per month.
Well, that's a great price. But what about the quality of these apartments? I've heard that some of them can be a bit outdated.
Yes, that's true. However, there are many modern apartments and buildings in Vilnius, especially in the Old Town area. And if you're willing to venture out a bit, you can find some great deals on apartments in nearby towns like Kaunas or Klaipėda.
I see. And what about the Netherlands? I've heard that Amsterdam is one of the most expensive cities in the world.
That's an understatement. Mira, Amsterdam is indeed one of the most expensive cities in the world, but the rest of the Netherlands is a bit more affordable. For example, a one-bedroom apartment in Utrecht or Groningen can cost around $600–800 per month.
Okay, that's still a bit pricey, but I'm sure it's worth it for the beautiful canals and architecture. But what about the quality of life in these apartments? I've heard that some of them can be quite small.
Yes, that's true. Such apartments can be a bit small, especially in cities like Amsterdam. But they're also very efficient and cozy, and many of them have great natural light. And if you're looking for a bit more space, you can always consider a house or a larger apartment in a suburb.
I see. And what about the rental process in Lithuania and the Netherlands? Is it easy to find a place to rent? Or do you need to have a local connection?
Well, in Lithuania, it's relatively easy to find a place to rent, especially in Vilnius. You can find apartments and houses on websites like Immobilien or Remax. Or you can work with a local real estate agent.
Okay, that sounds great. And what about the Netherlands? Do you need to have a local connection to find a place to rent?
Yes. It can be a bit more challenging to find a place to rent in the Netherlands, especially in cities like Amsterdam. But there are many websites and online platforms that can help you find a place to rent, such as Fundo or Powerhouse. And if you're willing to work with a local real estate agent, they can help you find a great place to rent.
I see. And what about the quality of service in Lithuania and the Netherlands? Do you need to deal with a lot of bureaucracy when renting a place?
Ah, yes, that's true. In both countries, you'll need to deal with some bureaucracy when renting a place. But it's not too bad. In Lithuania, you'll need to register with the municipality and obtain a residence permit. But this is relatively straightforward.
Okay, that sounds manageable. And what about the Netherlands? Do you need to deal with a lot of bureaucracy when renting a place?
Ah, yes. It can be a bit more challenging in the Netherlands, especially if you're not an EU citizen. But there are many resources available to help you navigate the process, such as the Dutch embassy or consulate in your home country.
I see. And what about the cost of living in Lithuania and the Netherlands? Is it more expensive to live in one country than the other?
Ah, yes, that's true. The cost of living in the Netherlands is generally higher than in Lithuania, especially in cities like Amsterdam. But the cost of living in Lithuania can vary depending on the region and the type of accommodation you choose.
Okay, that's interesting. And what about the quality of life in Lithuania and the Netherlands? Is one country more livable than the other?
Ah, yes, that's a tough question. Both countries have their pros and cons. But overall, I think the Netherlands has a slightly higher quality of life. The country has a strong economy, a high standard of living, and a great education system.
Okay, that's a good point. And what about Lithuania? What are some of its pros and cons?
Ah, yes. Lithuania has a lot to offer. The country has a rich history and culture, a beautiful landscape, and a growing economy. However, it can be a bit challenging to find a job in Lithuania, especially for foreigners.
Okay, that's a good point. And what about the job market in Lithuania and the Netherlands? Is one country more favorable to job seekers than the other?
Ah, yes. That's true. The job market in the Netherlands is generally more favorable to job seekers, especially in cities like Amsterdam. The country has a strong economy and a high standard of living, which makes it an attractive destination for professionals.
Okay, that's a good point. And what about the language barrier in Lithuania and the Netherlands? Is one country more challenging to navigate for non-native speakers?
Ah, yes. That's true. The language barrier can be a bit more challenging in the Netherlands, especially in cities like Amsterdam. However, many people in the Netherlands speak English, and there are many resources available to help you navigate the language barrier.
Okay, that's a good point. And what about the cultural differences between Lithuania and the Netherlands? Are there any significant differences that foreigners should be aware of?
Ah, yes. That's true. There are many cultural differences between Lithuania and the Netherlands, especially when it comes to customs and traditions. For example, in Lithuania, it's customary to remove your shoes before entering a home, while in the Netherlands, it's customary to remove your shoes only if you're invited to do so.
Okay, that's a good point. And what about the cost of transportation in Lithuania and the Netherlands? Is one country more expensive to get around than the other?
Ah, yes, that's true. The cost of transportation in the Netherlands is generally higher than in Lithuania, especially when it comes to public transportation. However, there are many affordable options available in the Netherlands, such as buses and trains.
Okay, that's a good point. And what about the quality of public transportation in Lithuania and the Netherlands? Is one country more reliable than the other?
Ah, yes, that's true. The quality of public transportation in the Netherlands is generally higher than in Lithuania, especially when it comes to buses and trains. However, Lithuania has made significant improvements to its public transportation system in recent years.
Okay, so when it comes to visa and immigration procedures, Lithuania and the Netherlands have some pretty interesting similarities and differences. Let's dive in.
I've heard that Lithuania has a relatively straightforward process for obtaining a residence permit. What's the general consensus? Mira?
Well, Leo, It's true that Lithuania's process is more streamlined than some other Eastern European countries. However, it's still essential to have all the necessary documents in order, including a valid passport, proof of income, and health insurance.
That makes sense. I've heard that the Netherlands has a more complex process, but also offers more benefits for expats. Can you elaborate on that?
Ah, yes. The Netherlands is known for its tolerant and welcoming attitude towards foreigners. However, the process of obtaining a residence permit can be quite lengthy and requires a lot of paperwork.
I'm curious. Mira, how do the two countries compare in terms of processing times? Is one country significantly faster than the other?
From what I've gathered, Lithuania tends to process residence permits relatively quickly, usually within a few weeks. The Netherlands, on the other hand, can take several months to a year or more.
Wow, that's a significant difference. I'm sure our listeners would appreciate any tips or advice on how to speed up the process.
Well, Leo, I'd recommend checking the official government websites for both countries to get the most up-to-date information. Additionally, consulting with a relocation expert or attorney can be incredibly helpful in navigating the process.
That's a great tip. Mira, I'm also curious. How do the two countries compare in terms of language requirements? Is English widely spoken in both countries?
Ah, yes. Both Lithuania and the Netherlands have a high proficiency in English, especially in urban areas. However, it's still essential to learn some basic phrases in the local language to fully integrate into the community.
I completely agree. Mira, I've found that learning a few key phrases can go a long way in making a good impression and building relationships with locals.
Exactly. And speaking of relationships, have you heard about the integration requirements for expats in the Netherlands?
No, I don't think I have. Can you tell me more about that?
Ah, yes. In the Netherlands, expats are required to attend an integration course, which covers topics such as Dutch culture, language, and customs. It's a great way to learn about the local way of life and make connections with other expats.
That sounds like a fantastic opportunity. Mira, I'm sure our listeners would be interested in learning more about the integration process.
Absolutely. Leo, and I think it's worth noting that both countries have their own unique challenges and opportunities when it comes to visa and immigration procedures. As expats, it's essential to be patient, flexible, and willing to learn about the local culture.
Well said. Mira, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, but I'm sure our listeners have more questions. Perhaps we can continue this conversation in a future episode?
Sounds like a plan. Leo, and to our listeners, don't forget to share your experiences and tips in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. So, let's get into the nitty-gritty of healthcare in Lithuania. I've heard that the country has a well-organized public healthcare system. But what about the quality of services?
Ah, great point. Mira, I've been researching this too, and it seems that Lithuania's healthcare system is indeed well-structured, with a focus on preventive care and disease prevention. But, let's be real, the quality of services can vary depending on the region and hospital.
That's a good point. I've also read that Lithuania has a relatively low infant mortality rate compared to other European countries, which suggests that the healthcare system is doing something right.
Exactly. And I think it's worth noting that Lithuania has a strong emphasis on community-based healthcare, with a focus on primary care and prevention. This approach has helped to reduce healthcare costs and improve overall health outcomes.
That's fascinating. And what about the Netherlands? I've heard that they have a very different approach to healthcare, with a strong focus on universal access and high-quality services.
Ah, yes. The Netherlands is indeed a leader in healthcare, with a highly developed system that prioritizes universal access, quality, and patient-centered care. And, as an added bonus, they have a very high level of healthcare literacy among their population, which makes for a more informed and empowered patient base.
Well, that's impressive. I'm curious. Leo, Have you noticed any differences in the way healthcare is approached in the two countries?
Well, Mira, one thing that stands out to me is the Netherlands' focus on patient-centered care and the role of patients in decision-making. In Lithuania, while there is a growing emphasis on patient-centered care, it's not as deeply ingrained in the healthcare system.
That's a great point, Leo. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on prevention and disease prevention. But the Netherlands seems to be more proactive in this area.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth mentioning that the Netherlands has a highly developed system for monitoring and evaluating healthcare outcomes, which helps to ensure that the healthcare system is meeting the needs of patients.
I see what you mean. And I'm curious, Leo, what do you think our listeners would say about the healthcare systems in these two countries?
Well, Mira, I think our listeners would likely say that the Netherlands has a more highly developed healthcare system, but Lithuania has a lot of potential for growth and improvement.
That's a fair point, Leo. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have their strengths and weaknesses, and it's up to each individual to make the most of their healthcare options.
Exactly. And I think it's worth mentioning that the best healthcare system in the world is only as good as the people who use it. So it's up to each of us to take an active role in our own healthcare.
Well said, Leo. And finally, I'm curious, what do you think our listeners can expect from the healthcare systems in Lithuania and the Netherlands?
Well, Mira, I think our listeners can expect a high level of care and attention to detail in the Netherlands. But in Lithuania, the level of care can vary depending on the region and hospital.
That's a good summary. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a lot to offer in terms of healthcare. And it's up to each individual to do their research and make informed decisions.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth mentioning that the best way to get a sense of the healthcare system in a particular country is to talk to people who have experienced it firsthand.
Well, Leo, I think that's a great note to end on. Thanks for the discussion. And I hope our listeners have found it informative and helpful.
Thanks, Mira. And to our listeners, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the healthcare systems in Lithuania and the Netherlands. Do you have any comments or experiences to share?
So, let's dive into transportation, infrastructure, and convenience in Lithuania and the Netherlands. I'm to share some insights with you. In Lithuania, public transportation is quite extensive, with buses, trolleys, and trains connecting major cities. I bet our listeners in Lithuania are familiar with the convenience of these services.
That's right, Mira. And in the Netherlands, they have an impressive network of buses, trains, and trams, making it easy for locals and tourists to get around. But what's interesting is that the Netherlands has a strong focus on cycling infrastructure, with dedicated bike lanes and paths.
Yes. Cycling is a great way to explore cities, and the Netherlands is a perfect example of how to make cycling a convenient and safe option. In Lithuania, you will also find bike-sharing systems in some cities, but they're not as widespread as in the Netherlands.
That's true, Mira. And speaking of bike sharing, I've heard that the Netherlands has a unique system where you can rent bikes for a day or a week, and even return them to any bike station in the country. It's like a bike-sharing paradise.
Well, that's certainly a convenient option. But what about road quality in Lithuania? I've heard that some roads can be quite rough, especially in rural areas.
Yes. Road quality can be a challenge in Lithuania, but it's not unique to the country. In the Netherlands, they also have some areas with rough roads, especially during winter months. However, the Dutch have a reputation for maintaining their roads well, so it's generally a smooth ride.
That's reassuring to know. And what about traffic congestion in Lithuania? I've heard that it can be a nightmare in some areas, especially during rush hour.
Well, Mira, I think we can all relate to traffic congestion, regardless of the country. But in the Netherlands, they have a unique system called traffic light priority, where certain vehicles, like buses and emergency services, get priority at intersections.
Well, that's a clever system. I bet our listeners in the Netherlands appreciate that feature. And what about public transportation apps in Lithuania. Are there any good ones that make it easy to plan your trip?
Ah, yes. Mira, there are several public transportation apps in Lithuania that make it easy to plan your trip, including the popular app Transport Opus L August OS. It allows you to plan your route, track the journey, and even get real-time updates on delays.
Great tip. Leo. And in the Netherlands, I've heard that they have a similar app called 9292, which is a great resource for planning your trip.
That's right, Mira. And speaking of apps, I think it's worth mentioning that many of these apps are available in multiple languages, making it easier for tourists to navigate the transportation system.
That's so important for tourists. Leo, and what about bike-friendly cities in Lithuania? Are there any cities that stand out for their cycling infrastructure?
Ah, yes. Mira, the city of Vilnius has made significant efforts to become a bike-friendly city, with dedicated bike lanes and paths. It's a great example of how cities can prioritize cycling infrastructure.
That's great to hear. Leo, and in the Netherlands, I've heard that Amsterdam is one of the most bike-friendly cities in the world. What's your experience with cycling in Amsterdam?
Well, Mira, I've had my fair share of cycling in Amsterdam, and I can tell you that it's a unique experience. The city is so flat and bike-friendly that it's almost like a bike paradise.
Well, I think we can all agree that cycling is a great way to explore cities. And what about public transportation costs in Lithuania? Are they affordable for tourists?
Ah, yes. Mira, public transportation costs in Lithuania are generally affordable for tourists, with many options available for short trips and longer journeys.
Great to know. Leo, and in the Netherlands, I've heard that public transportation costs can be a bit higher, especially for tourists.
That's true, Mira. But what's interesting is that the Netherlands has a system where you can buy a OV-chip card, which is a reusable public transportation card that can be used on buses, trains, and trams.
Wow, that's a great idea. Leo, I bet our listeners in the Netherlands appreciate that feature. And what about transportation tips for tourists in Lithuania? Are there any must-knows that our listeners should be aware of?
Ah, yes. Mira, one tip I'd like to share is that many public transportation services in Lithuania offer discounts for students and seniors, so it's worth checking those out if you're eligible.
Great tip. Leo, and in the Netherlands, I've heard that tourists should be aware of the rush hour periods, when public transportation is more crowded and fares may be higher.
That's right, Mira. And speaking of rush hour, I think we can all relate to the chaos of commuting during peak hours. But in the Netherlands, they have a unique system where you can use OV-chip card to pay for your public transportation fare, even during rush hour.
Wow, that's a convenient feature. Leo, I bet our listeners in the Netherlands appreciate that. And what about transportation challenges in Lithuania? Are there any common issues that our listeners should be aware of?
Ah, yes. Mira, one challenge I'd like to mention is that some public transportation services in Lithuania may not run frequently enough, especially in rural areas. But what's great is that many cities in Lithuania have implemented bike-sharing systems to help fill that gap.
That's a great solution. Leo, and in the Netherlands, I've heard that tourists should be aware of the bike lanes that are designated for cyclists and how to navigate them safely.
That's right. Mira, and speaking of bike lanes, I think it's worth mentioning that many cities in the Netherlands have implemented cycle highways, which are dedicated bike paths that allow cyclists to travel quickly and safely.
Well, that's a great idea. Leo, I bet our listeners in the Netherlands appreciate that feature. And what about transportation costs in Lithuania? Are they affordable for tourists?
Ah, yes. Mira, public transportation costs in Lithuania are generally affordable for tourists, with many options available for short trips and longer journeys.
Great to know. Leo, and in the Netherlands, I've heard that public transportation costs can be a bit higher, especially for tourists.
That's true, Mira. But What's interesting is that the Netherlands has a system where you can buy a OV-chip card, which is a reusable public transportation card that can be used on buses, trains, and trams.
Wow, that's a great idea. So, let's dive into language barriers and ease of communication in Lithuania and the Netherlands. I'm curious, Leo, have you ever encountered any language challenges in Lithuania?
Actually, I was in Vilnius and managed to get by with just English. But I did notice that many locals appreciated it when I made an effort to speak a few basic Lithuanian phrases. It's amazing how far a simple lattice can go.
That's so true. I remember when I was in Vilnius. I tried to order a coffee and ended up getting a coffee with a side of cream, which I didn't ask for. The barista was laughing and said, I think he meant to say Bevan de Suke on the Terrijos.
Oh, yes. That's exactly what I'd say if I wanted a coffee with no cream. I'm impressed you tried to order in Lithuanian. Mira, what made you want to try it out?
Well, I think it's always fun to challenge yourself and try to communicate in a new language. And, of course, the locals appreciate the effort. I'm sure our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with me that making an effort to learn the language is essential.
Absolutely. And it's not just about learning the language. It's also about understanding the cultural nuances and customs in the Netherlands. For example, it's customary to use formal language when speaking to someone you don't know well, but informal language with friends and family.
That's a great point. Leo, I remember when I was in Amsterdam, I was speaking to a shopkeeper in informal language, and he corrected me. Sorry, but we use formal language here. I felt a bit embarrassed, but I appreciated the correction.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the informal language, but it's great that you were open to learning and adapting. And speaking of language, have you ever tried to navigate the Netherlands' complex grammar rules?
Oh, boy. No, I stick to the basics. But I've heard that the Netherlands has some of the most complex grammar rules in the world. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think the grammar rules are too complex?
Well, I think it's definitely a challenge, but it's also what makes the language so unique and interesting. And, of course, it's not just about grammar. It's also about vocabulary and idioms. In the Netherlands, for example, there are many idiomatic expressions that can be tricky to understand.
That's a great point. Leo, I remember when I was in Utrecht. I was trying to order a sandwich, and the shopkeeper said, Sorry, we're out of brew G today. I didn't know what brew G meant, and he had to explain it to me. It was a great learning experience.
Ah, yes. Broodje is a great example of a Dutch word that can be tricky to understand. But it's also a great example of how the locals are willing to help and explain things to you.
So, let's talk about expat experiences in Lithuania and the Netherlands. I've heard that many expats in the Netherlands have trouble adjusting to the language and culture, but also that many expats in Lithuania have a more positive experience.
That's true. Mira, I think it's because Lithuania is a more homogeneous culture, and many Lithuanians speak English, making it easier for expats to navigate. But, of course, it's also because Lithuania has a more relaxed attitude towards language and culture.
I see what you mean, Leah. And I think it's also because Lithuania has a more welcoming culture, which makes it easier for expats to feel at home. I'm sure our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with me that the locals are very welcoming.
Absolutely. And it's also because Lithuania has a more vibrant expat community, with many groups and organizations that cater to expats. In the Netherlands, it's a bit more challenging to find expat groups and communities.
That's a great point. Leo, I think it's also because the Netherlands has a more formal culture, which can make it harder for expats to feel at home. But, of course, it's also because the Netherlands has a more complex language, which can be a challenge for expats to learn.
Well, I think it's a bit of both, Mira. But, of course, it's also because the Netherlands has a more tourist-friendly culture, which makes it easier for expats to navigate. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think the Netherlands has a more tourist-friendly culture?
Well, I think it's a great point, Leo. And I think it's also because the Netherlands is a more developed infrastructure, which makes it easier for expats to get around. I'm sure our listeners living in the Netherlands would agree with me that the infrastructure is top-notch.
Absolutely. And it's also because the Netherlands has a more extensive public transportation system, which makes it easier for expats to get around. In Lithuania, it's a bit more challenging to get around without a car.
That's a great point. Leo, I think it's also because Lithuania has a more rural culture, which can make it harder for expats to get around without a car. But, of course, it's also because Lithuania has a more welcoming culture, which makes it easier for expats to feel at home.
Well, I think it's a bit of both. Mira. But, of course, it's also because Lithuania has a more relaxed attitude towards language and culture, which makes it easier for expats to navigate. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think Lithuania has a more relaxed attitude towards language and culture?
Well, I think it's a great point, Leo. And I think it's also because Lithuania has a more vibrant expat community, with many groups and organizations that cater to expats. In the Netherlands, it's a bit more challenging to find expat groups and communities.
Absolutely. And it's also because the Netherlands has a more formal culture, which can make it harder for expats to feel at home. But, of course, it's also because the Netherlands has a more complex language, which can be a challenge for expats to learn.
That's a great point, Leo. I think it's also because the Netherlands has a more tourist-friendly culture, which makes it easier for expats to navigate. I'm sure our listeners living in the Netherlands would agree with me that the culture is very welcoming.
Absolutely. And it's also because the Netherlands has a more developed infrastructure, which makes it easier for expats to get around. In Lithuania,
Dive into cultural diversity and tolerance in Lithuania and Netherlands. I'm curious to see how these two countries approach embracing differences and fostering social cohesion. Lithuania has a rich history of cultural diversity, with influences from the Baltic, Slavic, and Germanic peoples.
that's fascinating. I've always been interested in the cultural melting pot of the Netherlands. With its tolerant and open society, it's no wonder that the Netherlands has been a magnet for immigrants and refugees.
Exactly. And Lithuania, while having a more complex history, has made significant strides in promoting cultural diversity and tolerance. In fact, the country has a dedicated Ministry of Culture, which works to preserve and promote Lithuanian culture, as well as support the integration of minority groups.
That's great to hear. I'm curious to know more about the specific initiatives and programs that Lithuania has in place to promote cultural diversity and tolerance.
Well, one example is the Lithuanian Language and Culture Program, which aims to promote the use of the Lithuanian language among minority groups.
And how does this program work in practice?
Well, the program provides language classes and cultural workshops for minority groups, as well as supports the development of cultural festivals and events that celebrate Lithuanian heritage.
That sounds like a great way to promote cultural diversity and tolerance. I'm sure our listeners would be interested in learning more about this program.
Absolutely. And I'm curious to know, Leo, what are some of the initiatives and programs that the Netherlands has in place to promote cultural diversity and tolerance?
Well, one example is the Integration Fund, which provides support for immigrants and refugees to integrate into Dutch society.
That's great. I've heard that the Netherlands has a very open and tolerant society. But I'm curious to know more about the specific challenges that immigrants and refugees face when integrating into Dutch society.
Yes. One of the biggest challenges is language barriers. Of course, but the Netherlands also has a strong tradition of promoting cultural diversity and tolerance, with many organizations and initiatives working to support the integration of minority groups.
I see. And what about Lithuania? How does the country address the challenges of language barriers and cultural integration?
Well, Lithuania has a dedicated program to support the integration of minority groups, including language classes and cultural workshops.
That's Great to hear. I'm curious to know more about the specific initiatives and programs that Lithuania has in place to support the integration of minority groups.
Well, one example is the Minority Integration Program, which provides support for minority groups to integrate into Lithuanian society.
Ah, I see. And how does this program work in practice?
Well, the program provides language classes and cultural workshops for minority groups, as well as supports the development of cultural festivals and events that celebrate Lithuanian heritage.
Ah, I see. It sounds like Lithuania and the Netherlands are both working to promote cultural diversity and tolerance in their respective ways.
Absolutely. And I think it's great to see that both countries are committed to promoting cultural diversity and tolerance.
Yes, and I think our listeners would agree with us. If you have any thoughts or experiences to share about cultural diversity and tolerance in Lithuania or the Netherlands, please let us know in the comments. I'm loving the vibe of Lithuania so far, with its medieval architecture and bustling streets. It's hard not to feel like you're in the middle of a fairy tale. And speaking of fairy tale-like learning environments, let's dive into the educational opportunity in both countries. I'm curious to see how Lithuania stacks up against the Netherlands in terms of literacy rates and innovative teaching methods.
Yes. Literacy rates are indeed a crucial aspect of any country's educational system. From what I've gathered, Lithuania has a high literacy rate of around 99%, which is impressive. However, the Netherlands boasts an even higher rate of around 99.5%. I'm not sure if that extra 0.5% makes a significant difference, but I suppose it's always good to aim for perfection.
Well, I suppose it's always good to aim for perfection, but let's not get too caught up in numbers just yet. I'd love to hear more about the innovative teaching methods in the Netherlands. I've heard that they have a strong emphasis on project-based learning, where students work together to solve real-world problems. That sounds like a great way to foster critical and collaboration skills.
Exactly. The Netherlands has a fantastic approach to education, and their focus on project-based learning is one of the key factors. Not only does it promote critical and collaboration, but it also encourages students to take ownership of their learning and develop a sense of responsibility. And, of course, who can resist the allure of a good project-based learning experience?
Fair enough, Leo. But let's talk about Lithuania's approach to education. I've heard that they have a strong emphasis on science and technology, with a focus on developing skills in these areas from a young age. That sounds like a great way to prepare students for the increasingly tech-driven world we live in.
Yes. Lithuania's emphasis on science and technology is certainly impressive. And, I must say, their approach to education is quite similar to the Netherlands in many ways. Both countries place a strong emphasis on developing skills in these areas, and both have a focus on project-based learning. It's interesting to see how similar their approaches are, despite being two very different countries.
I completely agree, Leo. And I think it's great that both countries are prioritizing these areas. But I'm curious to know more about the language acquisition process in both countries. How do students learn languages in Lithuania and the Netherlands?
That's a great question. Leo, in the Netherlands, language acquisition is a big part of the education system. Students typically start learning a second language, usually English, from a young age, and they also have the opportunity to learn other languages like German or French. And, of course, they have a strong focus on developing language skills through project-based learning.
That sounds like a great approach, Leo. And in Lithuania, I've heard that students typically start learning a second language, usually English, from around the age of 10. They also have the opportunity to learn other languages like German or French. But it seems that English is the most popular choice.
Yes, that's right, Mira. And it's interesting to see how both countries approach language acquisition in similar ways, despite being two very different countries. But I suppose that's what makes education so fascinating, right? The way that different countries approach similar challenges in unique ways.
Absolutely, Leo. And I think that's one of the things that makes this topic so fascinating. But let's not get too caught up in the similarities just yet. I'd love to hear more about the student testimonials and experiences in both countries. What are some of the things that students have said about their educational experiences in Lithuania and the Netherlands?
Ah, that's a great question. Mira, I've heard that students in the Netherlands have spoken highly of their educational experiences, praising the innovative teaching methods and the focus on project-based learning. And, of course, they've also praised the beautiful country and the friendly people. Who wouldn't want to learn in a place like that?
Fair enough. Leo. And I've heard that students in Lithuania have also spoken highly of their educational experiences, praising the strong emphasis on science and technology and the focus on developing skills in these areas. And, of course, they've also praised the beautiful country and the friendly people.
Ah, yes, that's right. Mira. And it's great to see how both countries have such positive reputations when it comes to education. But I suppose that's what makes this topic so fascinating, right? The way that different countries approach education in unique ways, despite sharing similar goals and values.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that makes this topic so fascinating. But let's not get too caught up in the similarities just yet. I'd love to hear more about the educational strengths and weaknesses in both countries. What are some of the things that Lithuania and the Netherlands do particularly well? And what are some of the areas where they could improve?
Ah, that's a great question. Mira, in the Netherlands, I've heard that they do particularly well in terms of promoting creativity and critical through their innovative teaching methods. And they also have a strong focus on developing skills in areas like science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. However, I've also heard that they could improve in terms of addressing the needs of students with special educational needs.
That's a great point. Leo, in Lithuania, I've heard that they do particularly well in terms of promoting a strong emphasis on science and technology, and developing skills in areas like STEM. I've also heard that they could improve in terms of addressing the needs of students with special educational needs, as well as improving their language acquisition programs.
Ah, yes, that's right. Mira, and it's great to see how both countries are working to address these challenges and improve their educational systems. But I suppose that's what makes this topic so fascinating, right? The way that different countries approach education in unique ways, despite sharing similar goals and values.
Absolutely. Leo, and I think that's one of the things that makes this topic so fascinating. But let's not get too caught up in the similarities just yet. I'd love to hear more about the educational opportunities and language schools in both countries. What are the unique features of these institutions? And what are some of the things that make them stand out?
Ah, that's a great question. Mira, in the Netherlands, I've heard that some of the unique features of their educational institutions include their focus on project-based learning, as well as their emphasis on developing skills in areas like STEM. And I've also heard that some of the language schools in the Netherlands offer a range of programs for students of all ages and skill levels.
I'm loving the cold, crisp air of Lithuania in winter, don't you? Leo? The snow-covered landscapes are just breathtaking.
Ah, I can see why you'd enjoy it. Mira! But let's not forget, Lithuania's winters can be quite harsh, with temperatures sometimes dropping below 20 degrees Celsius. Bjorn, that's no joke.
Oh, I know. Leo, but that's what makes it so magical, don't you think? The snowflakes gently falling on the frozen lakes, the sound of the wind whispering through the trees. It's like a winter wonderland.
I suppose it's a bit of a trade-off. Mira, on the one hand, you have the beautiful winter landscapes. But, on the other hand, you have to deal with the cold and darkness. I mean, in Lithuania, the sun can be as low as 3 hours a day in the winter. Well, that's a lot of darkness.
Oh, Yes, I remember reading about that. But you know what they say. There's no such thing as bad weather. Just bad clothing. And I'm sure our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with me that the cold weather is just a part of the charm.
Well, I suppose you're right. Mira, and speaking of charm, let's talk about the Netherlands. Have you ever been there in the winter? Mira, the canals are just beautiful when they're frozen over. Well,
Oh, yes. I have been to the Netherlands in the winter. Leah. And it's just stunning. The snow-covered houses, the frozen canals. It's like a fairy tale come true. Ugh. And the best part is, the Dutch are used to the cold weather that they just bundle up and carry on as usual.
that's true. Mira, the Dutch are known for their stoicism in the face of bad weather. But what about the extreme weather events? Mira, I've heard that the Netherlands is prone to flooding, especially in the winter. Is that true?
Ah, yes. Leo, it's true. The Netherlands is indeed prone to flooding, especially in the winter when the water levels are high. But the Dutch have learned to live with it and have even built some amazing flood protection systems to protect their cities and towns. And I'm sure our listeners living in the Netherlands would agree with me that it's just a part of life in the Netherlands.
Well, I suppose you're right. Mira, and speaking of flood protection, I've heard that Lithuania has some impressive flood protection systems as well. Can you tell me more about those? Mira?
Yes. Leo, Lithuania has some excellent flood protection systems, especially in the capital city of Vilnius. They have a network of canals and dikes that help to protect the city from flooding. And the best part is, the city is also very well prepared for extreme weather events, with emergency plans in place to deal with any flooding that may occur. Well...
Wow, that's impressive. Mira, and I'm sure our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with me that the country's commitment to flood protection is just one of the many reasons why it's such a great place to live.
I'm sure they would. Leo. And speaking of reasons why Lithuania is a great place to live, I think one of the reasons is the country's unique climate and seasonal conditions. I mean, who wouldn't want to experience the beauty of a Lithuanian winter or the charm of a Dutch spring? Oh.
Well, I suppose you're right. Yeah, and speaking of spring, I've heard that the Netherlands has some of the most beautiful tulip fields in the world. Have you ever seen them? Mira?
Oh yes. Leo. I have seen the tulip fields in the Netherlands, and they're just stunning. The colors, the beauty, the sheer scale of the fields. It's just breathtaking. Oh! And I'm sure our listeners living in the Netherlands would agree with me that the tulip fields are just one of the many reasons why the country is such a great place to visit.
I'm sure they would. Mira, and I think that's a great way to end our discussion on climate and seasonal conditions in Lithuania and the Netherlands. Thanks for sharing your insights with us. Mira, well...
Thank you. Leo! It was my pleasure to share my love of Lithuanian and Dutch culture with our listeners. And I hope our listeners living in both countries will agree with me that the unique climate and seasonal conditions of each country are just one of the many reasons why they're such great places to live. So, food culture in Lithuania. It's all about hearty meals and rich flavors. They take their meat, potatoes, and vegetables very seriously, don't they?
That's right. Mira, Lithuanian cuisine is known for its traditional dishes like cepelinai, kabienai, and zeppelins. And let's not forget their love for dark rye bread and some milk. It's like a taste explosion in your mouth.
I'm curious. Leo, have you ever tried any of these dishes? I'm sure they're quite an adventure for the taste buds.
Oh, I have tried them. Mira, and let me tell you, they're a game changer. But I think what's even more interesting is the influence of other cultures on Lithuanian cuisine. They've got a mix of Polish, German, and Russian flavors that make their food truly unique.
That's a great point. Leo, And speaking of unique flavors, have you ever tried any of the traditional Lithuanian desserts? I know something like sakotis or kebab pastries.
Ah, yes. Sakotis is a classic. It's like a spiral-shaped cake made from dough and topped with powdered sugar. And kebab pastries are a staple in Lithuanian bakeries. They're basically a sweet pastry filled with jam or chocolate.
I'm getting hungry just about it. And I'm sure our listeners are too. I'm certain that our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with me that their traditional cuisine is a big part of their cultural identity.
Absolutely. Mira, food is a huge part of any culture, and Lithuania is no exception. But let's talk about the Netherlands for a moment. Their food culture is quite different from Lithuania's, isn't it?
That's right. Leo, the Netherlands is famous for its cheese, chocolates, and of course, their love for fries. Who can resist a good plate of fries with mayonnaise?
Exactly. And let's not forget their love for stroopwafels and poffertjes. Though, are some delicious treats.
I'm curious. Leo, have you ever tried making any of these traditional Dutch dishes at home? I'm sure it's quite a challenge.
Oh, I have tried. Mira. And let me tell you, it's not easy. But the result is worth it. I mean, who can resist a good plate of stroopwafels or poffertjes?
That's true. Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with us that traditional food is a big part of any culture. But let's talk about nutritional alternatives in both countries. What do you think about the trend of vegan and gluten-free food in Lithuania and the Netherlands?
Ah, that's a great topic. Mira, both countries are definitely seeing a rise in vegan and gluten-free options. In Lithuania, they've got a lot of traditional dishes that are already naturally vegan or gluten-free, like their soups and stews.
That's a good point. And in the Netherlands, they've got a lot of innovative food solutions that cater to different dietary needs, like their vegan cheese alternatives and gluten-free bread options.
Exactly. And I think it's great that both countries are embracing this trend. It's all about providing options for people with dietary restrictions or preferences.
I agree. Leah, and speaking of options, have you ever tried any of the innovative food solutions in the Netherlands? I'm of something like vegan cheese or gluten-free bread.
Ah, yes. I have tried some of those options. Mira. And let me tell you, they're amazing. The vegan cheese alternatives are so realistic. You'd never know the difference.
Oh, that's impressive. Leah? And I'm sure our listeners would love to try some of those options. If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments below.
No, I think it's great. Mira, the more options we have, the better. And I think both Lithuania and the Netherlands are doing a great job of providing those options.
I agree. Leah, and a topic on food culture and nutritional alternatives in Lithuania and the Netherlands. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks. Mira, it was a pleasure discussing food with you. And don't forget to tune in next time for more interesting topics and discussions.
Let's talk about the historical, cultural, and artistic values of Lithuania and the Netherlands. And to share some fascinating stories with you all. Cheers off. Hey, I love uncovering stories like this. And so, do we. Let's start with Lithuania. Have you heard about the Hill of Crosses?
Ah, yes. I've seen pictures of it. It's a truly unique sight. Thousands of crosses cover the hill, each one a symbol of hope and faith. I'm curious. Mira, how did this phenomenon come to be?
Well, Leo, the story dates back to the 19th century when Lithuanian Catholics would secretly build crosses as a form of resistance against Soviet rule. It's a powerful symbol of resilience and faith. And speaking of symbols, have you seen the beautiful architecture in Vilnius, the capital city of Lithuania?
Yes, I have. The old town is stunning. The Church of Street, and, for example, is an amazing example of Gothic architecture. And I've heard that Lithuania has a rich tradition of folk art. Can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. Lithuanian folk art, is known for its intricate patterns and designs. You can see it in the textiles, pottery, and wood carvings. And did you know that Lithuania has a rich tradition of music and dance? The country has a unique style of folk music that's been passed down through generations.
That's fascinating. I love learning about new cultures and their unique traditions. And speaking of unique traditions, I've heard that the Netherlands has a rich history of art and architecture. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes. The Netherlands has a rich history of art and architecture, particularly in the 17th century. You can see the influence of Dutch masters like Rembrandt and Vermeer in the beautiful paintings and architecture of the time. And did you know that the Netherlands has a unique tradition of windmills? They're an iconic symbol of the country's rich history.
That's amazing. I've always been fascinated by windmills. And I've heard that the Netherlands has a rich tradition of festivals and celebrations. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, the Netherlands has a wonderful tradition of festivals and celebrations. For example, the King's Day Festival is a huge celebration of the country's monarch. And did you know that the Netherlands has a unique tradition of folk music and art? The country has a unique style of folk music that's been passed down through generations.
That's great. I love learning about new cultures and their unique traditions. And I'm curious, Mira, what do you think is the most interesting aspect of the historical, cultural, and artistic values of these two countries?
That's a tough question, Leah. But I think what's most interesting is how both countries have a strong sense of community and tradition. Whether it's the Hill of Crosses in Lithuania or the King's Day Festival in the Netherlands, you can see the deep connection between the people and their heritage.
I agree. Mira, and I think that's what makes these countries so special. They have a unique blend of history, culture, and art that's just waiting to be explored. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about it. If you have any questions or comments, please let us know in the comments below.
Absolutely. Leo! And I'm sure our listeners would love to share their own experiences and stories about these two countries. Jet off. And I love hearing from its community. And we're sure our listeners do too.
That's all for this criterion. Folks, thanks for joining us on this journey through the historical, cultural, and artistic values of Lithuania and the Netherlands. Stay tuned for our next criterion, where we'll be exploring the natural beauty of these two countries.
I'm so to dive into the natural beauties and landscapes of Lithuania and Netherlands. I mean, who wouldn't want to explore the stunning Curonian Spit in Lithuania or the picturesque canals of Amsterdam in Netherlands? The former is like a mix of rugged coastline and sandy dunes, while the latter is all about charming bridges and houseboats.
I see what you mean. Mira, Lithuania's got that wild, untamed feel, whereas Netherlands is all about cozy, quaint charm. I think our listeners would love to know more about the unique natural features of each country. For instance, did you know that Lithuania has some of the most beautiful lakes in Europe? And in Netherlands, the Wadden Sea is a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the Wadden Sea. Do you guys have any personal experiences or favorite spots in the Netherlands? Let us know in the comments. Meanwhile, back to Lithuania. Have you ever heard of the State IJA National Park? It's like a hidden gem, with its rolling hills and picturesque villages.
Yes. State IJA is indeed a treasure. I've heard that the national park is home to some of the most beautiful forests in Europe. And speaking of forests, Netherlands has some incredible ones too, like the Hoogevelde National Park. It's like a secret world, with its heathlands and drifts. I can just imagine the two of us getting lost in there.
Oh, Leah, you're such a romantic. But seriously, I think it's great that both countries have such a strong focus on nature conservation. In Lithuania, for example, there are many protected areas like the Curonian Spit National Park, which helps preserve the unique ecosystem of the area. And in Netherlands, the government is working hard to restore the country's natural beauty, like the Wadden Sea.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance between preserving nature and promoting sustainable tourism. And speaking of tourism, Have you ever been to the Netherlands during the tulip season? It's like a colorful explosion. And in Lithuania, the Summer Solstice Festival is a must-see, with its bonfires and traditional folk music.
Oh, that sounds incredible. I'm actually planning a trip to the Netherlands soon, and I'm so to see the tulips in bloom. But I have to say, I'm also curious about the natural beauty of Lithuania. Have you ever been to the Hill of Crosses in Silesia? It's like a mysterious, mystical place, with its thousands of crosses.
Ah, yes. The Hill of Crosses is indeed a unique and moving experience. And I think our listeners would love to know more about the cultural significance of the hill. It's not just a natural one, but also a symbol of resilience and hope. I can just imagine the two of us climbing the hill and taking in the breathtaking views.
Oh, Leo, you are such a dreamer. But seriously, I think it's great that both countries have such a strong connection to nature and culture. And speaking of culture, have you ever heard of the traditional Lithuanian folk music and dance? It's like a fusion of folk and modern styles, with its lively rhythms and colorful costumes.
Ah, yes. Lithuanian folk music is amazing. And in Netherlands, the traditional windmills and canals are like a living museum. I can just imagine the two of us taking a boat ride through the canals and admiring the historic architecture.
Oh, Leo, you're such a charmer. But seriously, I think it's great that both countries have such a rich cultural heritage. And speaking of heritage, have you ever heard of the medieval town of Trakai in Lithuania? It's like a fairy tale castle, with its towers and moat.
Ah, yes. Trakai is indeed a magical place. And I think our listeners would love to know more about the history and architecture of the town. I can just imagine the two of us exploring the castle and taking in the stunning views of the surrounding countryside.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's topic. Thanks for joining us on this natural journey through Lithuania and Netherlands. If you have any favorite spots or experiences to share, please let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more exciting content. Let's talk about Lithuania, shall we? I'm certain that our listeners living in this country would agree with me that Lithuanians are quite passionate about sports and outdoor activities.
Ah, yes. And I'm curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you guys agree that Lithuanians are crazy about ice hockey?
Crazy about ice hockey? That's an understatement. They have a huge following. And it's not just about the game. It's about the culture and community that comes with it. Speaking of which, have you heard about the Energia hockey arena in Kaunas?
Actually, I have. It's one of the largest arenas in the country, and it's a hub for ice hockey tournaments and events. But I'm more interested in the outdoor activities that Lithuania has to offer.
Oh, yes. Lithuania has some amazing outdoor spots. From the scenic coastline to the beautiful forests and lakes, there's plenty to explore. And let's not forget about the cycling routes. They're perfect for a leisurely ride or a more challenging adventure.
That sounds great, but I'm more of a thrill seeker. I'd love to try some of the adventure sports that Lithuania has to offer. Have you heard about the zip lining and paragliding opportunities in the Zima, ICII region?
Zima ICII region, you say? I've heard of it, but I've never been there myself. But I've heard that it's a great spot for outdoor enthusiasts. And speaking of outdoor enthusiasts, I'm curious, have you tried any of the adventure sports in Lithuania? Leo?
Ah, yes. I have. I went ziplining in the Zima, ICII region, and it was an exhilarating experience. But I have to say, I think the Netherlands has some amazing adventure sports too.
Oh, really? What do you have in mind? I'm sure our listeners would love to hear about it.
Well, have you heard about the windmills in the Netherlands? They're not just for generating electricity. You can also go wind surfing and kitesurfing near them.
That sounds amazing. I've always wanted to try windsurfing. But I'm more interested in the hiking and cycling routes in the Netherlands. Have you heard about the AF Sloot Dip? A 32-kilometer long dike that connects the provinces of North Holland and Friesland?
Ah, yes. I've heard of it. It's a great spot for cycling and hiking. and the views are simply breathtaking. But I think what's even more exciting is the opportunity to try some of the unique sports that the Netherlands has to offer.
Unique sports, you say? I'm intrigued. What do you have in mind?
Well, had you heard about the sport of kabaddi? It's a contact team sport that originated in India, but it's also popular in the Netherlands.
Kabaddi? I've never heard of it, but it sounds interesting. I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about it.
Yes. It's a great sport to try. And speaking of trying new things, I think it's time for us to wrap up this topic. But before we do, I want to ask our listeners, have you tried any of the adventure sports or unique sports in Lithuania or the Netherlands?
Yes. And I'm sure our listeners would love to share their experiences with us. Let's hear about it in the comments section.
That's all for now. Folks, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more exciting content. So, our listeners are probably wondering, what's the nightlife scene like in Lithuania? From what I've heard, it's quite lively, especially in the capital city, Vilnius.
Yes. Vilnius is definitely the hub of nightlife in Lithuania. They have a great selection of bars, clubs, and restaurants that cater to all tastes and preferences.
That's great to hear. And I'm curious. Leo, have you ever been to Lithuania? What was your experience like?
Actually, I have been to Lithuania, and I was impressed by the warm hospitality of the locals. The nightlife scene is definitely vibrant, but it's also very laid back.
I can imagine. And I've heard that Lithuania has a great tradition of folk music and dance. Have you ever been to a traditional Lithuanian dance performance?
Yes, I have, and it was a fantastic experience. The energy of the crowd was infectious, and the music and dance were just incredible.
That sounds amazing. And now, let's compare it to the Netherlands. I'm sure our listeners are curious to know how the nightlife scene in the Netherlands compares to Lithuania.
Well, the Netherlands has a very different vibe, but it's also very lively. Amsterdam, in particular, is known for its nightlife scene, with a wide range of bars, clubs, and restaurants.
That's true. And I've heard that the Netherlands has a great tradition of tolerance and acceptance. How does that impact the nightlife scene?
That's a great question. The Netherlands has a very open-minded attitude towards all sorts of people, and that's reflected in the nightlife scene. You'll find a diverse range of bars and clubs that cater to all sorts of tastes and preferences.
That's great to hear. And I'm curious, Leo, have you ever been to a gay bar or club in the Netherlands?
Yes, I have, and it was a fantastic experience. The atmosphere was so welcoming and inclusive, and the music and dance were just incredible.
That's great to hear. And now, let's talk about some of the unique aspects of the nightlife scene in Lithuania and the Netherlands. In Lithuania, I've heard that there's a great tradition of karaoke bars.
Yes, that's true. Karaoke bars are very popular in Lithuania, and they're a great way to experience the local culture.
And in the Netherlands, I've heard that there's a great tradition of cheese-themed bars. Is that true?
Yes, it's true. The Netherlands is famous for its cheese, and you'll find all sorts of cheese-themed bars in Amsterdam.
That's amazing. And I'm sure our listeners are curious to know about some of the unique events and festivals that take place in Lithuania and the Netherlands.
Well, in Lithuania, there's a great tradition of folk festivals, such as the Vilnius Festival, which takes place every summer.
And in the Netherlands, I've heard that there's a great tradition of flower-themed festivals, such as the Tulip Festival.
Yes, that's true. The Netherlands is famous for its tulips, and the Tulip Festival is a great way to experience the local culture.
That's great to hear. And I'm curious, Leo, what's your favorite thing about the nightlife scene in Lithuania and the Netherlands?
That's a tough question. But I think my favorite thing is the sense of community and camaraderie that you find in both countries. The nightlife scene is all about coming together and having a good time.
I completely agree. And I think that's what makes the nightlife scene in Lithuania and the Netherlands so unique and special.
Absolutely. And I think our listeners would agree with us.
I'm certain that our listeners living in the Netherlands would agree with us about the great nightlife scene.
And I'm sure our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with us about the warm hospitality of the locals.
Well, there you have it, folks. The nightlife scene in Lithuania and the Netherlands is definitely worth checking out.
And don't forget to try some of the local cheese in the Netherlands. It's delicious.
And don't forget to try some of the local beer in Lithuania. It's also delicious.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed this episode of our podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more episodes like this one. I'm certain our listeners would love to know about the family-friendly environments in Lithuania and Netherlands. Both countries have a strong focus on family life. But let's dive into what makes them unique. Lithuania, for instance, has an abundance of parks and playgrounds, perfect for kids to run around and burn off energy.
That's true. Mira, Lithuania's parks are indeed wonderful. But I think we should also talk about the museums. The National Museum of Lithuania in Vilnius is a great place for kids to learn about history and culture. And let's not forget about the interactive exhibits that make learning fun.
Great point. Leo, interactive exhibits are a great way to engage kids in learning. But I think we should also mention the family-friendly activities in Netherlands. Have you heard about the Kinderdijk windmills? They're a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a great place for kids to learn about windmills and their history.
Yes. Kinderdijk is an amazing place. And the windmills are so much fun for kids to explore. But what I think is really interesting is the way the Dutch prioritize family time. They have a saying, kind and koop, which means child and cooking. And it's all about spending quality time with your family in the kitchen. I think that's really beautiful.
That's so true. Leo, the Dutch do prioritize family time. And it's lovely to see. And speaking of cooking, have you tried any traditional Lithuanian dishes with your family? I've heard that the Lithuanian dish, zeppelins, is a favorite among kids.
Yes. Zeppelins. I think that's a fun name for a dish. But actually, I think our listeners might be more interested in hearing about the family-friendly activities in both countries. What do you think? Mira, should we share some of our favorite family-friendly activities in Lithuania and Netherlands?
Absolutely. Leo, I think it would be great to share some of our favorite activities. In Lithuania, one of my favorite family-friendly activities is visiting the Trochoi Island Castle. It's a beautiful castle surrounded by a lake, and kids can run around and explore the castle and its surroundings.
That sounds amazing. Mira, I think our listeners would love to know more about the Trochoi Island Castle. And in Netherlands, I think one of the best family-friendly activities is visiting the Efteling theme park. It's a beautiful theme park with amazing rides and attractions for kids of all ages.
I love the Efteling theme park. But I think we should also mention the importance of language when traveling with kids. In Lithuania, many Lithuanians speak English, but it's still a good idea to learn a few basic phrases in Lithuanian. And in Netherlands, Dutch is the official language, but many Dutch people speak English as well.
Yes. Language is so important when traveling with kids. But I think we should also talk about the cultural differences between the two countries. In Lithuania, for instance, Sundays are a day of rest, and many shops and restaurants are closed. In Netherlands, Sundays are also a day of rest, but many shops and restaurants are still open.
Yes. Cultural differences are always fascinating. And speaking of cultural differences, have you noticed how the Dutch prioritize sustainability and the environment? They have a saying, houd Netherlands schoon, which means keep the Netherlands clean. And it's all about taking care of the environment.
Yes. The Dutch do prioritize sustainability. And it's lovely to see. And I think our listeners would love to know more about the family-friendly activities in both countries. What do you think? Mira, should we share some more of our favorite activities?
Absolutely. Leo, I think it would be great to share some more of our favorite activities. In Lithuania, One of my favorite family activities is visiting the Hill of Crosses. It's a beautiful hill covered in thousands of crosses, and kids can run around and explore the hill and its surroundings.
Yes. The Hill of Crosses is a beautiful place. And in Netherlands, I think one of the best family-friendly activities is visiting the Amsterdam Zoo. It's a beautiful zoo with amazing animals and attractions for kids of all ages.
Ah, yes. The Amsterdam Zoo is a great place to visit. And speaking of animals, have you noticed how many animals are featured in Lithuanian folklore? In Lithuania, there are many stories about animals, such as the wolf and the bear.
Yes. Lithuanian folklore is full of stories about animals. And I think our listeners would love to know more about the cultural heritage of both countries. What do you think? Mira, should we share some more about the cultural heritage of Lithuania and Netherlands?
Absolutely. Leon, I think it would be great to share more about the cultural heritage of both countries. In Lithuania, one of the most important cultural festivals is the Jūziegavnes, which is a midwinter festival that celebrates the arrival of spring.
Yes. The Jūziegavnes is a beautiful festival. And in Netherlands, one of the most important cultural festivals is the King's Day, which is a national holiday that celebrates the birthday of the King of the Netherlands.
Yes. The King's Day is a great festival. And speaking of festivals, have you noticed how many festivals are held in both countries? In Lithuania, there are many festivals throughout the year, such as the Vilnius Festival and the Kaunas Festival.
Yes. Lithuania has a rich cultural calendar. And in Netherlands, there are also many festivals throughout the year, such as the Amsterdam Festival and the Utrecht Festival.
Yes. Both countries have a vibrant cultural scene. And speaking of culture, have you noticed how the Dutch prioritize art and design? They have a saying, "How mooi is de wereld?" which means how beautiful is the world. And it's all about appreciating the beauty of the world around us.
Yes. The Dutch do prioritize art and design. And I think our listeners would love to know more about the art and design scene in both countries. What do you think? Mira, should we share some more about the art and design scene in Lithuania and Netherlands?
Absolutely. Leah, I think it would be great to share more about the art and design scene in both countries. In Lithuania, one of the most famous artists is the painter, Kazys Smetona. He's known for his beautiful landscapes and portraits.
Yes. Kazys Smetona is a famous artist. And in Netherlands, one of the most famous artists is the painter, Vincent van Gogh. He's known for his beautiful landscapes and still life paintings.
Yes. Vincent van Gogh is a legendary artist. And speaking of art, have you? So, let's talk about Lithuania and the Netherlands when it comes to LGBT-friendly atmospheres. I'm curious. Leo, what's your take on Lithuania's progress in this area?
Well, Mira, Lithuania has made some significant strides in recent years. The country has a relatively high ranking in the EU's LGBT Equality Index. And Vilnius has been hosting a vibrant pride parade for years.
That's great to hear. Leo, I'm sure our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with you. But what about the Netherlands? How does it compare to Lithuania in terms of LGBT friendliness?
The Netherlands is a whole different story. Mira, as one of the most liberal countries in the world, it's no surprise that the Netherlands has a thriving LGBT community. Amsterdam's Pride Parade is one of the largest and most famous in the world, and the city has a reputation for being a hub for all things LGBT.
Well, that's impressive. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think the Netherlands' liberal attitude towards LGBT issues is something that other countries can learn from? Leo?
Absolutely. Mira, the Netherlands has shown that with the right policies and attitude, a country can be a haven for LGBT individuals. And it's not just about the laws and regulations, but also about creating a culture of acceptance and inclusivity.
That's so true. Leo, and I think that's something that Lithuania can learn from as well. I mean, who wouldn't want to be a part of a community that's welcoming and inclusive? But what about the challenges that LGBT individuals face in Lithuania? Leo?
Yes. Mira. Unfortunately, LGBT individuals in Lithuania still face many challenges, including discrimination and violence. But despite these challenges, the community remains strong and resilient.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with you. Leo, but what about the government's response to these challenges? Have they taken any steps to address them?
Well, Mira, the government has made some efforts to address the challenges faced by LGBT individuals, but there's still a lot more work to be done. However, it's worth noting that the government has taken steps to improve the situation, including introducing anti-discrimination laws and increasing funding for LGBT organizations.
That's great to hear. Leo, and I think it's also worth noting that the community itself is playing a big role in creating change. I mean, who'd better advocate for themselves than the individuals who are affected by these laws?
Exactly. Yeah, the community is taking matters into their own hands and advocating for their rights. And it's not just about the laws and regulations, but also about creating a culture of acceptance and inclusivity.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Leo, do you think that the community's efforts to create change are something that other countries can learn from?
Absolutely. Mia, the community's efforts to create change are a testament to the power of grassroots activism and the importance of community-led initiatives.
That's so true. Leo, and I think it's also worth noting that the Netherlands has a similar approach to creating change, with many community-led initiatives and organizations working to promote LGBT rights.
Exactly. Mira, the Netherlands has a strong tradition of community-led activism, and it's something that Lithuania can learn from as well.
I think that's all the time we have for today. Leo, before we go, I just want to say that I'm so inspired by the efforts of the LGBT community in both Lithuania and the Netherlands. It's a reminder that even in the face of adversity, there's always hope for change.
Absolutely. Mira, and I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in, and we'll catch you all in the next episode.
I'm sure our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with me. It's a country with a rich history and a strong sense of community. Hospitality is indeed a core value there.
That's true. But I've also heard that Lithuanians can be quite reserved when it comes to foreigners. They might not always be as open as other cultures.
I see what you mean. But I think that's because they value their personal space and traditions. It's not that they're unfriendly, but rather they're cautious about outsiders.
I understand what you're saying, but I've had some experiences with Lithuanians that made me think otherwise. For instance, when I was traveling through Vilnius, I met a local who took me under his wing and showed me around the city. He was incredibly warm and welcoming.
That's great to hear. Leo, I'm sure your listener's experience was an exception, but it just goes to show that there are many kind-hearted people in Lithuania.
Exactly. And I think that's something that our listeners in Lithuania can appreciate. After all, it's not just about being open to foreigners, but also about showing them the true spirit of your culture.
Absolutely. And speaking of cultural exchange, have you noticed how many Lithuanians are learning English these days?
Yes, I have. It's great to see how they're embracing the global language. But I also think it's interesting that some Lithuanians still prefer to speak in their native language, even with foreigners.
Oh, that's true. And I think that's because they value their language and culture so much. But at the same time, it's also a sign of respect for the foreigner's desire to communicate in their own language.
Exactly. And I think that's something that our listeners can appreciate. After all, it's not just about speaking the same language, but also about showing respect for each other's cultures.
Now, let's compare this to the Netherlands. I've heard that the Dutch are known for their friendly and welcoming nature.
That's right. The Dutch are indeed known for being very open and friendly to foreigners. They have a saying, "Geen probleem," which means no problem. And it's a perfect example of their hospitality.
I love that. And I think that's something that our listeners in the Netherlands can appreciate. After all, it's not just about being friendly. but also about showing respect for each other's cultures.
Exactly. And I think that's something that our listeners can appreciate. After all, it's not just about speaking the same language, but also about showing respect for each other's cultures.
Now let's talk about cultural norms around integration. In Lithuania, I've heard that there's a strong emphasis on preserving traditional values and customs.
That's true. In Lithuania, there's a strong sense of community and tradition, and many people place a high value on preserving their cultural heritage.
I see what you mean. But I think that's also something that can be beneficial for foreigners. After all, it's a great way to learn about a new culture and connect with the local community.
Exactly. And I think that's something that our listeners can appreciate. After all, it's not just about preserving traditional values, but also about embracing new ideas and perspectives.
Now, let's compare this to the Netherlands. I've heard that the Dutch are known for their tolerance and openness to new ideas.
That's right. The Dutch are indeed known for their tolerance and openness to new ideas. They have a saying, tolerant is HETS lu tel word, which means tolerance is the key word. And it's a perfect example of their values.
I love that. And I think that's something that our listeners in the Netherlands can appreciate. After all, it's not just about being tolerant, but also about showing respect for each other's differences.
Exactly. And I think that's something that our listeners can appreciate. After all, it's not just about speaking the same language, but also about showing respect for each other's cultures.
Now, let's talk about the importance of language in building bridges across cultures. In Lithuania, I've heard that many people struggle with English, but they're making a great effort to improve their language skills.
That's true. In Lithuania, there's a growing awareness of the importance of language in communication, and many people are taking steps to improve their language skills.
I see what you mean. But I think that's also something that can be beneficial for foreigners. After all, it's a great way to connect with the local community and build relationships.
Exactly. And I think that's something that our listeners can appreciate. After all, it's not just about speaking the same language, but also about showing respect for each other's cultures.
Now, let's compare this to the Netherlands. I've heard that many Dutch people are fluent in English, and they're very welcoming to foreigners.
That's right. The Dutch are indeed known for their language skills and their welcoming nature. They have a saying, "Alles is mogelijk," which means everything is possible. And it's a perfect example of their optimistic attitude.
I love that. And I think that's something that our listeners in the Netherlands can appreciate. After all, it's not just about being optimistic, but also about showing respect for each other's cultures.
Exactly. And I think that's something that our listeners can appreciate. After all, it's not just about speaking the same language, but also about showing respect for each other's cultures.
I'm curious about Lithuania's internet infrastructure. Does it live up to its reputation as a digital hub in the Baltic region?
Lithuania's got some impressive tech credentials, but I'm not sure if it's entirely accurate to call it a digital hub. I mean, have you seen the state of their roads? It's like they're still in the 90s.
Well, I think you're being a bit harsh. Leo, Lithuania has made significant investments in digital infrastructure, including its fiber optic network. In fact, it's one of the most developed in the region.
Oh, really? That's great. But what about the speeds? I've heard they're still a bit slow compared to other European countries.
Actually, Lithuania's internet speeds are quite good. According to a recent report, the average download speed is around 60 bats, which is comparable to other EU countries.
That's not bad. But what about the mobile network? I've heard it's a bit patchy in some areas.
Yes, that's true. Lithuania's mobile network is still developing, and there are some areas where coverage is limited. The country is investing in upgrading its infrastructure to improve mobile connectivity.
I see. So it sounds like Lithuania has a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to internet infrastructure. But what about the Netherlands? I've heard they're a tech paradise.
Yes. The Netherlands is indeed a leader in digital infrastructure. They have some of the fastest internet speeds in the world, with an average download speed of over 200 bats.
Wow, that's impressive. But what about the cost? I've heard the Netherlands is one of the most expensive countries for internet in Europe.
Actually, the cost of internet in the Netherlands is quite high, especially for high-speed connections. But it's worth it for the quality and speed you get.
I see. So it sounds like the Netherlands has a more developed digital infrastructure than Lithuania, but at a higher cost.
That's right, Leo. But it's worth noting that the Netherlands is also a hub for digital nomads and remote workers, with many co-working spaces and online communities.
Ah, that's a great point. Mira, I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the digital nomad scene in the Netherlands.
Well, if you're a digital nomad, the Netherlands is definitely a great place to be. With its fast internet, co-working spaces, and online communities, you'll have everything you need to stay productive and connected.
I'm curious. Mira, what about the digital divide in Lithuania? I've heard it's a problem in some rural areas.
Yes, that's true. Lithuania does have a digital divide, especially in rural areas where internet access is limited. However, the government is working to improve connectivity in these areas.
I see. So it sounds like Lithuania is still working to catch up with other European countries in terms of digital infrastructure.
That's right, Leo. But worth noting that Lithuania has made significant progress in recent years, and the country is committed to continuing to improve its digital infrastructure.
I'm curious. Mira, what about the impact of the digital revolution on traditional industries in Lithuania? I've heard it's had a significant impact.
Yes, that's true. The digital revolution has had a significant impact on traditional industries in Lithuania, such as manufacturing and agriculture. It's also created new opportunities for innovation and entrepreneurship.
I see. So, it sounds like Lithuania is embracing the digital revolution and using it to drive growth and innovation.
That's right, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that a strong digital infrastructure is essential for a country's economic growth and competitiveness.
Absolutely. Mira, and I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the digital landscape in both Lithuania and the Netherlands.
Well, if you're interested in learning more, be sure to check out our next episode, where we'll be exploring the digital nomad scene in more detail.
And don't forget to follow us on social media for the latest updates and behind-the-scenes insights into our podcast.
Thanks for tuning in. Everyone, I'm to dive into the world of shopping in Lithuania and the Netherlands. Both countries have unique retail scenes, from bustling markets to sprawling malls. Let's start with Lithuania's capital, Vilnius. I've heard the markets are a must-visit for bargain hunters.
Yes. The markets in Vilnius are a treasure trove of affordable goods. You can find everything from handmade crafts to second-hand items. But let's not forget about the Netherlands' famous flea markets in Amsterdam and Utrecht.
Flea markets. I love them. In Lithuania, you can haggle with vendors to get a better price. It's all about the art of negotiation. In the Netherlands, I've heard the flea markets are more laid back, but still offer great deals.
That's true. The Dutch are known for their love of bargains. But have you tried shopping in Lithuania's malls? They're surprisingly modern and offer a wide range of international brands.
I've heard that too. In fact, Vilnius has a few upscale malls that rival those in Western Europe. But what about the prices? Are they comparable to the Netherlands?
Now that's a good question. Prices in Lithuania can be surprisingly affordable, especially when it comes to food and drinks. But luxury goods can be pricey, just like in the Netherlands.
I'm curious about the price-performance balance in both countries. Do our listeners have any experiences with shopping in Lithuania or the Netherlands? Let's hear from you in the comments.
Absolutely. I think it's worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on local products and craftsmanship. In Lithuania, you can find unique handmade items, while you can find high-quality Dutch cheese and chocolates.
I love Dutch cheese. And I've heard the Netherlands has a great selection of high-end fashion brands. Are they comparable to those in Lithuania?
Well, the Netherlands has a more established luxury market, but Lithuania is catching up. Vilnius has a few high-end boutiques, and the prices are surprisingly competitive.
That's great to hear. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about shopping in both countries. Let's move on to the topic of online shopping. How does it compare in Lithuania and the Netherlands?
Online shopping is a whole different ballgame. Both countries have a strong e-commerce market, but the Netherlands has a more developed online shopping culture.
That's true. In Lithuania, online shopping is still growing, but it's gaining momentum. And I've heard the Netherlands has some great online deals, especially during sales seasons.
Exactly. The Dutch love a good sale, and online shopping makes it easy to snag a bargain. But what about delivery times and costs? Are they comparable in both countries?
Good question. I've heard that delivery times in Lithuania can be a bit longer than in the Netherlands, but the prices are generally more affordable in Lithuania.
That's a great point. And let's not forget about the importance of customer service in both countries. Have you had any experiences with customer service in Lithuania or the Netherlands?
Actually, I have. In Lithuania, I found the customer service to be very friendly and helpful. But in the Netherlands, I've had some mixed experiences.
Yes. Customer service can be hit or miss in both countries. But overall, I think both Lithuania and the Netherlands offer great shopping experiences, with unique retail scenes and competitive prices.
I agree. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that shopping is a big part of traveling and experiencing a new culture. Let's hear from you in the comments. What are your favorite shopping destinations in Lithuania and the Netherlands? I'm telling you, Leo, Lithuania's got a treasure trove of cultural events. From the Vilnius Festival to the Konestius Festival. There's something for every music lover.
That's true. But the Netherlands has its own unique festival scene. With the Amsterdam Canal Parade and the Utrecht Carnival, you'll find a mix of traditional and modern celebrations.
But Lithuania's got a rich cultural heritage that's hard to match. The country's been a U and the SC a recognized site for its folk architecture, and the festivals just amplify that.
I agree, but the Netherlands has a way of blending traditional and modern elements. For instance, the King's Day celebration is a unique fusion of Dutch culture. Well, let's just say, a bit of chaos.
Chaos? I like that. But seriously, Lithuania's got a great tradition of folk music and dance. You should check out the U's Nest festivities in Vilnius.
I'll have to, but I'm more of a fan of the Netherlands' vibrant music scene. With the likes of ties to Andarman van Buren, the country's got a reputation for producing top-notch DJs.
Oh, so you're a fan of the big guns of Dutch music? Huh? Well, I think Lithuania's got some hidden gems too. The country's been producing some amazing folk rock bands lately.
I'm sure it has, but I'm curious what's the most popular festival in Lithuania. Is it the Vilnius Festival or the Konestius Festival?
That's a tough one. I think it's a tie between the two. But if I had to pick one, I'd say the Vilnius Festival is the winner. It's a week-long celebration of music, theater, and dance.
That sounds amazing. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you guys have a favorite festival in Lithuania or the Netherlands?
Well, I'm sure our listeners have some great suggestions. And speaking of suggestions, if you're looking for more information on festivals in Lithuania, check out Jetoff. AI, these insights could have been possible without Jetoff by referring to cultural trends.
Fair enough. But seriously, folks, if you're interested in learning more about the cultural events in Lithuania and the Netherlands, be sure to check out our next episode where we'll be diving deeper into the topic.
That's right. And don't forget to tune in next time when we'll be discussing the topic of 24, nightlife and party scenes.
And if you're joining us for a party in Lithuania or the Netherlands, Just remember we'll be there to guide you through the festivities.
That's right. And who knows? Maybe one day we'll even have a joint party in both countries. Wouldn't that be something?
No, that's a thought. But for now, let's just enjoy the cultural events and festivals in each country. It's a unique experience that's sure to leave you with lasting memories.
Absolutely. And if you have any comments or suggestions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. I'm thrilled to share that both Lithuania and the Netherlands have made significant strides in language education, making it easier for newcomers to learn the local tongue.
Indeed. They've implemented various programs to facilitate language acquisition, from language schools to cultural immersion. But, Mira, I have to ask, which one do you think is more challenging for foreigners to learn?
That's a great question. Leo, I'd say both languages have their unique characteristics. But, if I had to pick one, I'd say Lithuanian is slightly more difficult due to its complex grammar and pronunciation.
Interesting. But what about the Netherlands? Don't they have a more straightforward language?
Well, yes. Dutch is indeed a Germanic language, but it's not without its challenges. For instance, the pronunciation of certain letters can be quite different from what we're used to.
Ah, I see what you mean. And I'm sure our listeners who have attempted to learn Dutch will agree with me. But, Mira, what about the opportunities for language learning in both countries? Are they similar or different?
That's a great point. Leo, both countries offer a range of language schools and programs, but the Netherlands has a more extensive network of language schools, especially in major cities like Amsterdam and Rotterdam.
That's fascinating. I'm sure many of our listeners would appreciate knowing about these opportunities. And, Mira, I'm curious, what about language exchange programs? Do they exist in both countries?
Oh, yes, they do. In fact, both countries have a strong language exchange culture, with many programs and initiatives that allow people to practice their language skills with native speakers.
Wow, that's great to hear. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about these programs. And, Mira, what about language learning apps? Are they popular in both countries?
Yes, they are. In fact, the Netherlands has a thriving app-based language learning scene, with many apps offering Dutch language courses and resources.
That's amazing. I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing about these resources. And, Mira, I'm curious, what about cultural immersion? Can you tell us a bit about the cultural events and festivals in both countries that might help language learners get a feel for the local culture?
Yes. Cultural immersion is a fantastic way to learn a language. In both countries, there are many festivals and events that celebrate the local culture, from the Netherlands' King's Day celebrations to Lithuania's Jūsų festivities.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of fun. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about these events. And, Mira, what about language learning tips and resources? Are there any specific tips or resources that you'd recommend for language learners in both countries?
Yes, there are. In fact, both countries have a wealth of language learning resources, from language learning podcasts to YouTube channels offering language lessons.
That's great to hear. I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing about these resources. And, Mira, I'm curious, what about language learning communities? Are there any online communities or forums where language learners can connect and practice their language skills?
Yes, there are. In fact, both countries have a strong online language learning community, with many forums and social media groups where language learners can connect and practice their language skills.
Wow, that's fantastic. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about these communities. And, Mira, what about language learning advice for our listeners who are planning to move to other country? What would you recommend for them?
That's a great question. Leo, I'd recommend that they immerse themselves in the local culture as much as possible, whether through language exchange programs, cultural events, or simply by practicing their language skills with native speakers.
Oh, I see what you mean. And, Vera, what about language learning apps? Are there any specific apps that you'd recommend for language learners in both countries?
Ah, yes, there are. In fact, the Netherlands has a popular language learning app called Duolingo, which offers Dutch language courses and resources.
Ah, that's great to hear. I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing about this resource. And, Mira, what about language learning podcasts? Are there any popular podcasts that offer language lessons in both countries?
Ah, yes, there are. In fact, both countries have a range of language learning podcasts. From Dutch language podcasts like DTOL Studio to Lithuanian language podcasts like Lithuanian Pod 101.
Wow, that's fantastic. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about these podcasts. And, Mira, what about language learning books? Are there any popular books that offer language lessons in both countries?
Ah, yes, there are. In fact, both countries have a range of language learning books, from Dutch language textbooks like Grammatica van HET Netherlands to Lithuanian language textbooks like Lietuvio Kalbo S Grammatica.
Ah, that's great to hear. I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing about these resources. And, Mira, what about language learning online courses? Are there any popular online courses that offer language lessons in both countries?
Ah, yes, there are. In fact, both countries have a range of online language courses, from Dutch language courses like Dutch Pod 101 to Lithuanian language courses like Lithuanian Pod 101.
Wow, that's fantastic. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about these courses. And, Mira, it's kind of like a thing. What about language learning software? Are there any popular software programs that offer language lessons in both countries?
Ah, yes, there are. In fact, both countries have a range of language learning software, from Dutch language software like Rosetta Stone to Lithuanian language software like Lingua Y.
Ah, that's great to hear. I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing about these resources. And, Mira, what about language learning games? Are there any popular games that offer language lessons in both countries?
Ah, yes, there are. In fact, both countries have a range of language learning games, from Dutch language games like Lingua Lie to Lithuanian language games like Lithuanian language learning game.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about these games. And, Mira, what about language learning YouTube channels? Are there any popular channels that offer language lessons in both countries?
Ah, yes, there are. In fact, both countries have a range of language learning YouTube channels, from Dutch language channels like Dutch Pod 101 to Lithuanian language channels like Lithuanian Pod 101. So, when it comes to safety and comfort for women travelers, I think we can both agree that Lithuania and the Netherlands have some great stories to share. From my research, I found that Lithuania has a strong focus on women's rights and equality. In fact, they have a special law that protects women from domestic violence.
Ah, yes. And that's really admirable. But, let's be real. Mira, Lithuania can be a bit of a conservative country. I've heard that women in traditional areas might face some harassment or catcalling. But, hey, that's not unique to Lithuania, right?
Exactly. Leo. And, actually, I think the Netherlands has a similar issue. While they're generally considered one of the safest countries for women, there are some areas in larger cities where women might feel uncomfortable. But I'm sure our listeners living in the Netherlands would agree that it's still a wonderful place to visit.
Absolutely. Mira, and I think it's worth noting that both countries have made significant progress in terms of women's rights. In Lithuania, for example, women now have the right to equal pay and equal opportunities in the workplace. And in the Netherlands, women have the right to reproductive freedom and access to abortion.
That's so great to hear. Leo, And I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have a strong focus on community initiatives that support women's safety and comfort. In Lithuania, for example, there are many organizations that provide support for women who have experienced violence or harassment.
Yes. And I think that's really important. Because, well, laws and policies are great. They're only as effective as the community that supports them. And, in the Netherlands, there are many organizations that provide support and resources for women who are traveling or living in the country.
Exactly. Leah, and I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on education and awareness raising around women's safety and comfort. In Lithuania, for example, there are many programs that teach men and boys about healthy masculinity and respect for women.
Yes. And I think that's really crucial. Because, if we want to create a society that's truly safe and comfortable for women, we need to start educating men and boys about the importance of respect and consent.
Absolutely. Leah! And I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have a strong focus on tourist infrastructure that supports women's safety and comfort. In Lithuania, for example, there are many tourist information centers that provide resources and advice for women travelers.
Yes. And I think that's really helpful. Because, as women travelers, we often need to rely on local advice and resources to stay safe and comfortable. And, in the Netherlands, there are many tourist information centers that provide similar resources and advice.
So, what do you think? Leah? Do you have any personal experiences or tips for women travelers in Lithuania and the Netherlands?
Yes. Well, I think it's worth noting that, as a man, I've had some interesting experiences traveling with women in both countries. And I think it's always helpful to have a local guide or companion who can provide advice and support.
Yes. That's so true. Leah, and I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have a strong focus on women's empowerment and independence. In Lithuania, for example, women are encouraged to take on leadership roles and participate in politics.
Yes. And I think that's really inspiring. Because if we want to create a society that's truly safe and comfortable for women, we need to start empowering women to take on leadership roles and make their voices heard.
Absolutely. Leah. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on cultural events and festivals that celebrate women's contributions and achievements.
Yes. And I think that's really wonderful. Because, as women travelers, we often want to experience the local culture and traditions of the countries we visit.
So, what do you think? Leah? Do you have any final thoughts or recommendations for women travelers in Lithuania and the Netherlands?
Yes. Well, I think it's worth noting that, as women travelers, we need to be aware of our surroundings and take necessary precautions to stay safe. But, also, we need to be open-minded and respectful of local cultures and traditions.
Yes. That's so true. Leah, and I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have a strong focus on women's health and well-being. In Lithuania, for example, there are many resources and services available for women's reproductive health.
Yes. And I think that's really important. Because as women travelers, we often need to access health services and resources that are tailored to our needs.
So, there you have it. Both. A comparison of safety and comfort for women travelers in Lithuania and the Netherlands. I'm curious to hear from our listeners what are your experiences and tips for women travelers in these countries. Dive into the fascinating world of legal systems in Lithuania and the Netherlands. Both countries have a rich history, but their approaches to individual rights and freedoms are quite different. In Lithuania, the Constitutional Court plays a crucial role in ensuring that the government respects human rights and fundamental freedoms. It's like having a referee on the field, keeping everything in check.
That's a great analogy. Mira, in the Netherlands, the Constitutional Court is also an important institution, but it's more focused on protecting the rights of citizens in relation to the government. They have a unique approach to individual rights, which is all about balancing the rights of the individual with the needs of society. It's like a game of chess, where every move has to be carefully considered.
I love that analogy. In Lithuania, the concept of individual rights is more closely tied to the idea of national identity and sovereignty. The country has a strong tradition of protecting human rights, but it's also had its share of challenges, like the suppression of minority rights during the Soviet era. It's a complex issue, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how the Netherlands approaches minority rights.
That's a great question. Mira, in the Netherlands, the concept of minority rights is deeply embedded in the country's culture and history. The Netherlands has a long tradition of tolerating and protecting minority groups, including the Jewish community, the Romani people, and others. They have a unique approach to minority rights, which is all about recognizing and respecting the cultural diversity of the country.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think that Lithuania and the Netherlands are doing enough to protect minority rights? Should they be doing more to promote cultural diversity and understanding? Let us know in the comments.
Well, I think that both countries are doing their best to protect minority rights, but there's always room for improvement. In Lithuania, for example, there are still some issues with minority language rights, particularly for the Polish minority. In the Netherlands, there are concerns about the integration of migrant communities and the protection of their rights.
That's a great point. Leo, in Lithuania, the government has taken steps to promote the use of minority languages, but there's still a long way to go. In the Netherlands, the government has implemented policies to promote the integration of migrant communities, but there are still challenges to be addressed.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with me that the country has made significant progress in protecting minority rights. However, there's still a long way to go, particularly in terms of promoting the use of minority languages. In the Netherlands, the government has taken a more proactive approach to promoting the integration of migrant communities, but there are still challenges to be addressed.
I think that's a great point. Leo, in Lithuania, the government has taken steps to promote the use of minority languages, but there's still a long way to go. In the Netherlands, the government has implemented policies to promote the integration of migrant communities, but there are still challenges to be addressed.
One thing that's interesting to note is that both countries have a strong tradition of protecting individual freedoms, including the right to freedom of speech and assembly. In Lithuania, the government has taken steps to promote freedom of speech, but there are still some concerns about the protection of this right.
That's a great point. Leo, in the Netherlands, the government has a long tradition of protecting individual freedoms, including the right to freedom of speech and assembly. However, there are still some concerns about the protection of this right, particularly in the context of hate speech and extremist ideologies.
I think that's a great topic for our listeners to discuss in the comments. What do you think about the protection of individual freedoms in Lithuania and the Netherlands? Should they be doing more to protect the right to freedom of speech and assembly?
Well, I think that both countries are doing their best to protect individual freedoms, but there's always room for improvement. In Lithuania, the government has taken steps to promote freedom of speech, but there are still some concerns about the protection of this right.
That's a great point. Mira, in the Netherlands, the government has a long tradition of protecting individual freedoms, including the right to freedom of speech and assembly. However, there are still some concerns about the protection of this right, particularly in the context of hate speech and extremist ideologies.
I think that's a great topic for our listeners to discuss in the comments. What do you think about the protection of individual freedoms in Lithuania and the Netherlands? Should they be doing more to protect the right to freedom of speech and assembly?
Well, I think that both countries are doing their best to protect individual freedoms, but there's always room for improvement. In Lithuania, the government has taken steps to promote freedom of speech, but there are still some concerns about the protection of this right.
One thing that's interesting to note is that both countries have a strong tradition of protecting individual rights and freedoms, but they approach this issue in different ways. In Lithuania, the focus is on protecting the rights of the individual, while in the Netherlands, the focus is on balancing the rights of the individual with the needs of society.
That's a great point. Mira, in Lithuania, the government has a strong tradition of protecting individual rights and freedoms. But there are still some concerns about the protection of minority rights and the promotion of cultural diversity.
I think that's a great topic for our listeners to discuss in the comments. What do you think about the protection of individual rights and freedoms in Lithuania and the Netherlands? Should they be doing more to promote cultural diversity and understanding?
Well, I think that both countries are doing their best to protect individual rights and freedoms. But there's always room for improvement. In Lithuania, the government has taken steps to promote cultural diversity. But there are still some concerns about the protection of minority rights.
That's a great point. Leo, in the Netherlands, the government has implemented policies to promote the integration of migrant communities, but there are still challenges to be addressed.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with me that the country has made significant progress in protecting individual rights and freedoms. However, there's still a long way to go, particularly in terms of promoting the use of minority languages and protecting minority rights.
I think that's a great point. Leo, in Lithuania, the government has taken steps to promote the use of minority languages, but there's still a long way to go. In the Netherlands, the government has implemented policies to promote the integration of migrant communities, but there are still challenges to be addressed.
One thing that's interesting to note is that both countries have a strong tradition of protecting individual freedoms, including the right to freedom of speech and assembly. In Lithuania, the government has taken steps to promote freedom of speech, but there are still some concerns about the protection of this right.
That's a great point. Leo, in the Netherlands, the government has a long tradition of protecting individual freedoms. Let's dive into spa and wellness experiences in Lithuania and the Netherlands. Both countries offer a range of unique and rejuvenating options. In Lithuania, I'm curious about the concept of spa in general.
Ah, yes. In Lithuania, spas are deeply rooted in tradition, often featuring natural hot springs and mineral water.
That sounds incredible. I've heard that Lithuania's spas are particularly famous for their mud treatments.
Exactly. The mud from the Curonian spit, for example, is rich in minerals and is believed to have healing properties.
I'm definitely adding that to my bucket list. In the Netherlands, I've read that wellness is a big focus, especially in the larger cities.
Yes, the Dutch are known for their love of healthy living, and cities like Amsterdam and Utrecht offer a wide range of wellness options, from yoga studios to spas.
I'm curious. Leah, what's the most popular wellness activity in the Netherlands?
I think it's got to be cycling. The Dutch are famous for their cycling culture, and it's a great way to stay active and enjoy the beautiful countryside.
I can see why. In Lithuania, I've heard that traditional folk remedies are still popular, especially for treating ailments like arthritis.
Yes, traditional folk remedies are still an important part of Lithuanian culture, and many people swear by them for treating various health issues.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think traditional folk remedies are still relevant in today's world?
Oh, that's a great question. I think traditional folk remedies can be a great way to connect with one's heritage and culture. But it's also important to be cautious and do your research before trying any new remedies.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. In the Netherlands, I've heard that the concept of gezondheid is important for overall well-being.
Ah, yes. Gezondheid is a Dutch concept that roughly translates to coziness or social warmth. And it's a big part of Dutch culture.
I love that. It sounds like a wonderful way to cultivate a sense of community and connection.
Exactly. And I think it's something that our listeners can definitely relate to, whether they're from Lithuania or the Netherlands.
I'm certain that our listeners living in this country would agree with me. The concept of gezondheid is definitely something that's worth exploring further.
Ah, absolutely. And speaking of exploring, have you ever tried a traditional Lithuanian sauna? Mira?
Actually, no, but I'm definitely curious about it now.
Well, it's definitely an experience you won't forget, and I think our listeners would love to hear more about it.
I'll have to write a follow-up post about that. In the Netherlands, I've heard that the concept of duurzaamheid is also important for overall well-being.
Ah, yes. Duurzaamheid is a Dutch concept that roughly translates to sustainability, and it's a big part of Dutch culture.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think sustainability is an important aspect of overall well-being?
Ah, absolutely. I think living sustainably is essential for our physical and mental health. And it's something that our listeners can definitely relate to.
I couldn't agree more. In Lithuania, I've heard that the concept of nature therapy is becoming more popular.
Ah, yes. Nature therapy is a growing trend in Lithuania. And it's a great way to connect with nature and improve overall well-being.
I love that. It sounds like a wonderful way to cultivate a sense of connection with the natural world.
Exactly. And I think it's something that our listeners can definitely try, whether they're from Lithuania or the Netherlands.
I'm certain that our listeners living in this country would agree with me. Nature therapy is definitely something that's worth exploring further. I'm really curious about Lithuania, especially when it comes to its rich spiritual landscape. With a mix of pagan and Christian influences, the country has a unique approach to faith and spirituality. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this blend of cultures.
Ah, yes. Lithuania is indeed a fascinating example of how different cultures can come together to create a rich tapestry of spiritual experiences. And I think our listeners would agree that it's always exciting to explore new and unfamiliar traditions.
Exactly. And speaking of traditions, Lithuania has a strong emphasis on folk culture and heritage, from the Hill of Crosses to the Kuronian Spit. There are countless ways to connect with the country's spiritual history. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about these hidden gems.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth noting that Lithuania has a relatively high percentage of people who identify as non-religious or atheist. So, it's not just about traditional faiths, but also about embracing a more secular or spiritual approach to life.
That's really interesting. Leo, and I think it's great that we were acknowledging the diversity of spiritual experiences in Lithuania. But let's not forget about the Netherlands, a second country. I'm sure many of our listeners are curious about the Dutch approach to faith and spirituality.
Ah, yes. The Netherlands is indeed a unique case study when it comes to spiritual diversity. With a strong tradition of tolerance and acceptance, the country has created a welcoming environment for people of all faiths and backgrounds. And I think our listeners would appreciate hearing about the various ways in which the Dutch approach spirituality.
Well, for one thing, the Netherlands has a rich tradition of Reformed Protestantism, which has had a significant impact on the country's spiritual landscape. And I think it's worth noting that many Dutch people identify as no religion or no denomination, which reflects the country's more secular approach to faith.
That's right. And I think it's also worth mentioning that the Netherlands has a strong tradition of humanism, which emphasizes the importance of human reason and individualism. This has led to a more individualized approach to spirituality, where people are encouraged to explore their own values and beliefs.
I love that. Leo, and I think it's great that we're highlighting the unique aspects of each country's spiritual landscape. But let's not forget about the commonalities between Lithuania and the Netherlands. Both countries have a strong emphasis on community and social support, which is essential for spiritual growth and well-being.
Ah, yes. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong tradition of folk culture and heritage, which is reflected in their architecture, art, and music. This is a great way to connect with the country's spiritual history and values.
Absolutely. And speaking of values, I think it's worth mentioning that both Lithuania and the Netherlands have a strong emphasis on tolerance and acceptance. This is reflected in their laws and policies, which protect the rights of minority groups and promote social inclusion.
That's right. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong tradition of education and intellectual inquiry, which is essential for spiritual growth and development. This is reflected in their universities and research institutions, which offer a wide range of courses and programs in theology, philosophy, and spirituality.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with me that the country's spiritual landscape is incredibly rich and diverse. And I'm sure our listeners in the Netherlands would appreciate hearing about the unique aspects of Dutch spirituality.
Ah, yes. And I think it's worth mentioning that both countries have a strong emphasis on environmentalism and sustainability, which is reflected in their laws and policies. This is a great way to connect with the country's spiritual values and promote social and environmental responsibility.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for today's topic. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the opportunities for religious and spiritual needs in Lithuania and the Netherlands. If you have any comments or questions, please let us know in the comments section.
Ah, yes. And before we go, I just want to say that I'm really grateful for the opportunity to explore these two countries' spiritual landscapes with Mira. It's been a real pleasure to delve into the complexities and nuances of faith and spirituality in Lithuania and the Netherlands.
Absolutely. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that it's been a fascinating journey through the spiritual landscapes of these two countries. Thanks for joining us, everyone. So, let's dive into social equality, respect for minorities, and diversity in our two countries. I'm curious to know more about Lithuania's approach to inclusivity. Do they have any notable policies or initiatives that promote social harmony?
Ah, yes. Lithuania has made significant strides in recent years. They've implemented programs to support minority groups, such as the Roma community, and have also established a national strategy for promoting social inclusion. It's a great example of how a country can prioritize diversity and equity.
That's fascinating. I'm certain that our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with me that promoting social inclusion is crucial. I'm also curious to know more about the cultural celebrations in Lithuania. How do they celebrate diversity and inclusivity through festivals and events?
Well, Lithuania has a rich cultural heritage, and they celebrate it through various festivals and events throughout the year. For example, they have the Vilnius Festival, which showcases traditional music, dance, and art from different ethnic groups. It's a wonderful way to promote cultural diversity and exchange.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do they have any favorite festivals or events that promote diversity and inclusivity in Lithuania? Let us know in the comments.
I'm sure they'll share their thoughts. Meanwhile, let's talk about the Netherlands. They're known for their tolerant and open society, but I'm curious to know more about their approach to social equality and diversity.
The Netherlands is indeed a great example of a country that values diversity and inclusivity. They have a strong tradition of promoting social equality and have implemented policies to support minority groups. For example, they have a law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, which is a great step forward.
That's true. And the Netherlands also has a rich history of promoting cultural diversity. They have a vibrant art scene, and many festivals and events celebrate different cultures and traditions. For example, the King's Day celebration is a big event that brings people together and promotes community spirit.
I love how the Netherlands celebrates diversity through festivals and events. And speaking of community spirit, I'm curious to know more about the role of community organizations in promoting social equality and diversity in the Netherlands. Do they play a significant role in supporting minority groups?
Absolutely. Community organizations in the Netherlands play a vital role in promoting social equality and diversity. They provide support and resources to minority groups, and also work to raise awareness about social issues and promote inclusivity. It's a great example of how grassroots efforts can make a big impact.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do they have any experiences or thoughts about the role of community organizations in promoting social equality and diversity in the Netherlands? Let us know in the comments.
I'm sure they'll share their thoughts. Meanwhile, let's talk about the connection between Lithuania and the Netherlands. How do these two countries compare when it comes to social equality and diversity?
That's a great question. While both countries have made progress in promoting social equality and diversity, they also have their own unique challenges and approaches. For example, Lithuania has a more conservative approach to LGBTQ rights, while the Netherlands has a more progressive stance. However, both countries have a strong commitment to promoting social inclusion and diversity.
That's true. And it's also interesting to note that both countries have a strong tradition of promoting cultural diversity and exchange. For example, Lithuania has a rich cultural heritage, and the Netherlands has a vibrant art scene. It's a great example of how the countries can learn from each other and promote cultural exchange.
I love how both promote cultural diversity and exchange. And speaking of exchange, I'm curious to know more about the role of education in promoting social equality and diversity in Lithuania and the Netherlands. How do schools and universities promote inclusivity and diversity?
Oh, that's a great question. Education plays a vital role in promoting social equality and diversity. In both countries, schools and universities have implemented programs and initiatives to promote inclusivity and diversity. For example, Lithuania has a program to support students with disabilities, while the Netherlands has a program to promote cultural diversity and exchange.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do they have any experiences or thoughts about the role of education in promoting social equality and diversity in Lithuania and the Netherlands? Let us know in the comments.
I'm sure they'll share their thoughts. Meanwhile, let's wrap up our discussion on social equality, respect for minorities, and diversity in Lithuania and the Netherlands. It's been a great conversation, and I'm sure our listeners have learned a lot about these two countries. Thanks for joining us.
So, let's get down to business and talk about taxation, retirement, and social rights for long-term immigrants in Lithuania and the Netherlands. I'm sure our listeners would love to know how these countries compare in terms of supporting immigrant residents.
That's right, Mia. Both Lithuania and the Netherlands have unique approaches to taxation, retirement, and social rights. Let's start with taxation. In Lithuania, the tax system is based on a progressive tax rate, with a maximum tax rate of 20%. Meanwhile, in the Netherlands, the tax system is based on a combination of income tax and value-added tax.
Ah, I see. So, in Lithuania, they have a more straightforward tax system, while the Netherlands has a more complex system with both income tax and VAT. But, Leo, what about the tax rates themselves? How do they compare?
Well, Mira, in Lithuania, the tax rates are relatively low, with a maximum tax rate of 20%. In contrast, the Netherlands has a higher maximum tax rate of 50%. However, it's worth noting that the Netherlands also has a higher standard of living, which means that taxes are also higher to fund public services and social benefits.
That's a good point. Leo, but I'm curious, how do the two countries compare in terms of retirement and social rights for long-term immigrants? Do they offer similar benefits? Or are there significant differences?
Great question. Mira, in Lithuania, the pension system is based on a point system, where immigrants can earn points for their work experience and qualifications. Meanwhile, in the Netherlands, the pension system is based on a combination of employer and employee contributions.
That's interesting. So, in Lithuania, it's more about individual contributions, while in the Netherlands, it's a combination of employer and employee contributions. But what about social safety nets? How do the two countries compare in terms of providing support for immigrant residents?
Well, Mira, both countries have social safety nets in place, but the Netherlands has a more comprehensive system, with a range of benefits, including unemployment benefits, disability benefits, and family benefits.
I see. So, the Netherlands has a more comprehensive social safety net, while Lithuania's system is more limited. But, Leo, what about healthcare? How do the two countries compare in terms of providing healthcare to immigrant residents?
Great question. Mira, in Lithuania, the healthcare system is based on a combination of public and private providers, while in the Netherlands, the healthcare system is based on a comprehensive public system, with universal coverage.
That's interesting. So the Netherlands has a more comprehensive public healthcare system, while Lithuania's system is more patchwork. But, Leo, what about language requirements? Do immigrants need to speak the local language to access these benefits?
Ah, great question. Mira, in Lithuania, there are no language requirements for accessing benefits. While in the Netherlands, there are some language requirements, especially for accessing certain social benefits.
I see. So, in Lithuania, it's more flexible, while in the Netherlands, there are some requirements. But, Leo, what about the overall cost of living in each country? How do the two countries compare in terms of affordability?
Well, Mira, both countries have a relatively low cost of living, but the Netherlands is generally more expensive than Lithuania. However, the Netherlands also offers a higher standard of living, which means that taxes are also higher to fund public services and social benefits.
Ah, I see. So, the Netherlands has a higher cost of living. That also offers a higher standard of living. But, Leo, what about the overall experience of living in each country? Do immigrants find it easy to integrate into each society?
Ah, great question. Mira, in both countries, immigrants can easily integrate into society, but the Netherlands is generally more welcoming to immigrants, with a more diverse and inclusive culture.
Ah, I see. So, the Netherlands is generally more welcoming, but both countries offer opportunities for integration. And, Leo, what about the future of taxation, retirement, and social rights for long-term immigrants in each country? Are there any changes on the horizon?
Ah, great question. Mira, both countries are constantly evolving their systems to better support immigrant residents. In Lithuania, there are plans to introduce a new pension system, while in the Netherlands, there are plans to introduce a new tax system.
Ah, I see. So, both countries are constantly evolving their systems to better support immigrant residents. And finally, I'm curious, what do our listeners think about this comparison? Do they have any comments or questions about taxation, retirement, and social rights in Lithuania and the Netherlands?
Ah, great question. Mira, we'd love to hear from our listeners. If you have any comments or questions, please let us know in the comments section below.
Dive into the rate of meeting specific interests in Lithuania and Netherlands. I'm certain that our listeners living in these countries would agree with me that having a community of like-minded people is essential to exploring and nurturing our passions.
Absolutely. Mira, both countries offer a rich tapestry of niche hobby clubs, specialized events, and community engagement opportunities that cater to a wide range of interests. From Lithuania's vibrant music scene to the Netherlands' thriving art communities, there's no shortage of ways to meet like-minded enthusiasts.
That's right. Leo, Lithuania's capital, Vilnius, is home to a variety of music festivals and concerts throughout the year. And with the country's strong focus on education and cultural exchange, it's the perfect place for language learners and culture enthusiasts.
Ah, I can already imagine the lively atmosphere of a Lithuanian music festival. And the Netherlands, with its rich history and cultural heritage, offers a unique blend of traditional and modern art forms. From the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, art lovers will find plenty of inspiration.
You're making me want to visit the Netherlands right now. Leo, but seriously, both countries have a strong sense of community and a willingness to engage with others, whether it's through language exchange programs or cultural events. There are countless opportunities to meet new people and explore shared interests.
That's the beauty of it. Mira! And it's not just about attending events or joining clubs, it's about creating a space for people to come together and share their passions. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think it's easier to meet like-minded people in one country over the other?
That's a great question. I think it ultimately depends on the individual's interests and preferences. I do think Lithuania's smaller size and more intimate atmosphere might make it easier to connect with others who share similar interests.
That's a good point. Mira, and the Netherlands, with its more urbanized cities and larger population, might offer more opportunities for people to meet and engage with others, but perhaps in a more anonymous way.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes both countries so unique and special in their own ways. So, let's talk about some specific examples of how people can meet specific interests in these countries. In Lithuania, for instance, there are numerous language exchange programs and cultural events that bring people together.
And in the Netherlands, there are countless museums, art galleries, and festivals that celebrate the country's rich cultural heritage. From the famous Tulip Festival in Keukenhof to the vibrant street art scene in Amsterdam. There's always something to explore.
You're making me want to visit the Netherlands even more. Leah, but seriously, both countries offer a wealth of opportunities for people to engage with their passions and meet like-minded individuals. And I think that's what makes them so appealing to visitors and residents alike.
That's the spirit. Mira! And I think that's what makes our listeners love these countries so much. They offer a unique blend of culture, history, and community that's hard to find elsewhere.
Well, folks, thanks for joining us on this comparison podcast. If you have any thoughts or comments, please let us know below. We'd love to hear from you and respond to your questions and critiques.
And don't forget to follow the Jet Off AI YouTube channel for more episodes like this. Hit that bell icon to catch our videos the moment they drop and be among the first to listen.
Thanks for tuning in. Everyone, take care and see you in the next one. Warmest wishes from us.
And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more comparison podcasts and travel tips. We'll be back soon with more. So stay tuned.
Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.